The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This is page 266, the chapter, The True Story of the Boston Tea Party, excerpted from Unequal Protection. On a cold November evening, activists gathered in a coastal town. The corporation had gone too far, and 2,000 people who jammed into the meeting hall were torn as to what to do about it. Unemployment was exploding. The economic crisis was deepening. Corporate crime, governmental corruption spawned by corporate cash, and an ethos of corporate greed were blamed. Why do we wait? Demanded one at the meeting, a fisherman named George Hughes. The more we delay, the more strength is acquired by the company and its puppets in government. Now is the time to prove our courage, he said. Soon the moment came when the crowd decided for direct action and rushed into the streets. This is how I tell the story of the Boston Tea Party now that I've read a first-person account of it. While trying to understand my nation's struggles against corporations, I came upon a first edition of a book titled A Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party with a memoir of George R.T. Hughes, a survivor of the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773. And I jumped at a chance to buy it. Because the identities of the Boston Tea Party participants are hidden, other than Sam Adams, and all were sworn to secrecy for the next 50 years, this volume, published 51 years after the Tea Party, is the only first-person account of the event by a participant that exists, as far as I can tell. As I read, I began to understand the true causes of the American Revolution. I learned that the Tea Party resembled in many ways the growing modern-day protests against transnational corporations and the small-town efforts to protect themselves against chain store retailers and factory farms. The Boston Tea Party's participants thought of themselves as protesters against the illegal actions of the multinational East India Company. Although schoolchildren are usually taught that the American Revolution was a rebellion against taxation without representation, akin to modern-day conservative taxpayer revolts, in fact, what led to the revolution was rage against a transnational corporation that, by the 1760s, dominated trade from China to India to the Caribbean and controlled nearly all commerce to and from North America, with subsidies and special dispensation from the British Crown. Hughes notes, the East India Company received permission to transport tea free of all duty from Great Britain to America, end of quote, enabling it to wipe out New England-based tea wholesalers and mom-and-pop stores and take over the tea business in all of America. Hence, Hughes told his biographer, it was no longer the small vessels of private merchants who went to vend tea for their own account in the ports of the colonies, but on the contrary, ships of an enormous burthen that transported immense quantities of this commodity. The colonies had now arrived at the decisive moment when they must cast the die and determine the course. A pamphlet called The Alarm was circulated through the colonies and signed by the enigmatic Rusticus. One issue made clear the feelings of colonial Americans about England's largest transnational corporation and its behavior around the world. Their conduct in Asia for some years past has given simple proof how little they regard the laws of nations, the rights, liberties, or lives of men. They have levied war, excited rebellions, dethroned lawful princes, and sacrificed millions for the sake of gain. The revenues of mighty kingdoms have entered their coffers, and these not being sufficient to glut their avarice, they have, by the most unparalleled barbarities, extortions, and monopolies, stripped the miserable inhabitants of their property and reduced whole provinces to indigence and ruin. 1,500,000, it is said, perished by famine in 1 year, not because the earth denied its fruits, but because this company and their servants engulfed all the necessities of life and set them at so high a price that the poor could not purchase them. After protesters had turned back the company's ships in Philadelphia and New York, Hughes writes, "In Boston, the general voice declared that the time has come to face the storm. The citizens of the colonies were preparing to throw off one of the corporations that for almost 200 years had determined nearly every aspect of their lives through its economic and political power. They were planning to destroy the goods of the world's largest multinational corporation, intimidate its employees, and face down the guns of the government that supported it." And so, as Hughes says, on that cold November evening in 1773, the first of the East India Company's ships of tax-free tea arrived in Boston Harbor. The next morning, a pamphlet was widely circulating, calling on patriots to meet at Faneuil Hall to discuss resistance to the East India Company and its tea. Things thus appeared to be hastening to a disastrous issue, wrote Hughes. The people of the country arrived in great numbers. The inhabitants of the town assembled. This assembly on the 16th of December, 1773, was the most numerous ever known, there being more than 2,000 from the country present. The group called for a vote on whether to oppose the landing of the tea. The vote was unanimously affirmative, and it is related by one historian of that scene, quote, that a person disguised after the manner of the Indians who was in the gallery shouted at this juncture the cry of war, and that the meeting dissolved in the twinkling of an eye, and the multitude rushed in a mass to Griffin's Wharf. That night, Hughes, blackening his face with coal dust, dressed as an Indian and joined crowds of other men in hacking apart the chests of tea and throwing them into the harbor. In all, the 342 chests of tea, more than 90,000 pounds thrown overboard that night, were worth, in today's currency, just over $1 million. Book, The Thom Hartmann Reader.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow. Donald, it's starting to get weird. I mean, yeah, Chris says starting. It's, okay, I acknowledge. It is genuinely weird. Donald Trump apparently doesn't really understand. I think, kind of at some surface level, he understands that there's a difference between health insurance and life insurance. But I don't think he understands how either one of them work. And apparently, he seems genuinely mystified that the Democrats are just obstructionists and the Republicans can't all get together to pass his legislation to strip 30 million people of health insurance. I think he genuinely doesn't understand. And there's a piece over in Huffington Post. Addie Barrett wrote a great piece over at thinkprogress.org. The title is "President Trump Really Doesn't Know How Health Insurance Works." And, yesterday, the New York Times, the big story last night was he had this conversation with the New York Times yesterday afternoon with the editors of the New York Times. And basically, dumped on Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein. And, that's newsworthy, I suppose. It's kind of the palace intrigue. Frankly, the palace intrigue, to me, is the least interesting of all of this stuff. The most interesting is, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to my viewers and listeners? What does it mean to all of us in the United States, what these guys are up to? And those are issues that almost never make it onto the corporate TV. But this is what Donald Trump said yesterday to the New York Times. They were talking about insurance. And he says, because you are basically saying that from the moment the insurance, you're 21 years old, you start working, and you're paying $12 a year for insurance. And by the time you're 70, you get a nice plan. And here's something where you walk up and say, I want my insurance. Now, it sounds to me like he's talking about actually not even term life insurance. He's talking about whole life insurance, where over time, as you're paying your life insurance premiums, you're also building equity. Which makes sense for a billionaire. He's probably got a substantial amount of that kind of life insurance. There's significant tax benefits. That kind of life insurance is something that, wealthy people invest in. But the $12 a year, I think he's thinking of $12 a month, and I think he's been watching Fox so-called news, and he's been watching these ads for, you can never be turned down for insurance ever again. You can get insurance as low as $12 a month. Just call, and it's a pitch for, subprime term life insurance. And I wouldn't be going off on this rant right now with you if this was the only time he'd ever said something this stupid about insurance. But it turns out back in May, he said, and I quote, "Insurance is you're 20 years old, you just graduated from college, and you start paying $15 a month for the rest of your life." Now he's got it per month, and now it's 15 instead of 12. But whatever. This is actually back in May. I guess he's now down to $12 a year instead of $15 a month. But back to what he said in May, 2 months ago. "Insurance is you're 20 months old, you just graduated from college, and you start paying $15 a month for the rest of your life, and by the time you're 70 and you really need it, you're still paying the same amount, and that's really insurance." This was an interview with The Economist, the international magazine of economics. And how that didn't make the front cover of the magazine, I don't know. I mean, first of all, can anybody buy term life insurance for $15 a month when they're 21 and fresh out of college? Most people aren't fresh out of college when they're 21, but whatever, 20 years old. He said, insurance says you're 20 years old, you just graduated from college. Okay, well, let's say somebody did. And they can get life insurance for $15 a month. You really think when you're 70, you're still paying $15 a month? I mean, typically, even when they insure rates, they only insure them for decades, 10 years at a time, and then the price goes up. Sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes, but it's life insurance. I've been watching this thing where Donald Trump is trying to promote the Republican so-called health care plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. And I suspect, Donald Trump used to be a single-payer guy. And whether that was 15 years ago, but whether that was because he actually understood it or because the last person he had talked to kind of explained it to him and he thought, oh, that's cool, and he explained it to Playboy magazine or something, and that, back in his single-payer days. And now he's forgotten or he never really understood in the first place. I don't know, but it's Jimmy Carter was criticized for being constantly in the weeds on policy, for going around and just trying to, understand and micromanage essentially everything that everybody was doing, in or around the White House. Jimmy Carter took a lot of flack for that. He was an engineer. He was a nuclear engineer. He was on nuclear subs. And engineers love to tinker. And, Bill Clinton, on occasion, was criticized for being too much of a policy wonk. Bill Clinton knew the details of everything. Barack Obama knew the details of everything. Now, Ronald Reagan took his 2-hour nap every afternoon. And, there wasn't much beyond that, it seems. But I'm starting to think that he actually doesn't have a clue, which raises the question, is he being kept ignorant by Mike Pence and the people around him in the White House? Do they literally view him as a useful idiot? Or is he actually saying to the people around him, don't talk to me. Don't explain things to me. I don't want to know. And I don't know the answer to that question. I do have the president's schedule, though. Being in the media, I'm on one of those secret mailing lists. And this from the White House today. In the morning, President Donald J. Trump will depart the White House en route to the Pentagon to participate in a poll mill session. This is where they just kind of, it's a round the world, summary of what's going on. The president will then return to the White House. In the afternoon, the president will make an announcement regarding a pharmaceutical glass packaging initiative. Got a busy day, this guy. He's just so jammed. And meanwhile, Paul Ryan is giving a speech on tax reform at the New Balance factory in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Remind me never to buy. Well, I'm not going to go there. The Judiciary Committee is voting on the FBI nominee, NATO. Oh, yeah. Betsy DeVos is addressing ALEC at the Hyatt Regency in Denver at the Colorado Convention Center. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Koch network-funded group that writes legislation or that invites lobbyists from various industries to come in and write legislation to give to Republican legislators to introduce at the state and occasionally federal level. So that's what's going on in the world today that I know about. But this is truly shocking to me that Trump, I mean, yesterday in his interview with the New York Times, he was like, well, I don't know, $15, $12 a year that you pay starting when you're 21, and then when you're 70, you still have it and you need it. And it's like, what? Okay, meanwhile, the protectors of free speech in our Congress, this is mind-boggling. 46 senators, 238 members of the House of Representatives are sponsors or co-sponsors of a piece of legislation. And I'm just going to read you a paragraph from a piece that Josh Israel, senior investigative reporter for Think Progress, wrote for thinkprogress.org today. This piece of legislation, known as the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. The legislation would expand existing laws to prohibit Americans from, quote, requesting the imposition of any boycott by a foreign country against a government which is friendly to the United States, and from supporting any boycott fostered or imposed by an international organization or requesting imposition of any such boycott against Israel. End of quote from the law. In other words, this law says it's against the law for you to talk about boycotting Israel, for you to advocate boycotting Israel, or for you to ask questions about boycotting Israel. According to the ACLU's letter, this would mean penalties if you violate this law, including up to 20 years in prison and fines between $250,000 and $1 million for advocating or even requesting information about a boycott of the state of Israel. Not making this up. It's principally Republicans, but there are some Democrats in on this. Joe Kennedy III, for example. It's like, really? You want to send me to prison for 20 years and fine me $1 million, you, the federal government, for saying, hey, maybe we should boycott Israel for the way they're treating Palestinians in Gaza. Really?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, this is grim stuff. And meanwhile, Jeff Sessions wants, more civil asset forfeiture. We'll get to that, too, as the day goes on. And welcome back. Jesse in Miami, Florida. Hey, Jesse, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thanks for Hey, we know the English language, they make a play on words. And I was always listening to free market, free market, free market. And then I started thinking, what is a free market where there's nothing free in there? You can't go to the market if you don't have no money.
Yeah.
So how can they use that word free and connect it with market?
Well, everybody loves the word free. That's why they inserted it before the word market. But the reality is there's no such thing as a free market unless it's like, you and I, Jesse, deciding that I'll wash your car if you'll mow my lawn. But even that's not truly a free market, because if in washing your car I broke a window, you have the ability to go to a court and sue me. So that's a regulated marketplace.
I agree. The only free market I really see is the market God gave us, the earth.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I agree. The natural world. That's it. But, these guys, they love that word free, and so they just they shovel that stuff out. Jesse, brilliant point. Thank you so much for the call. Al in Buffalo, New York, watching Free Speech on Cable. Hey, Al, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
Yes,
hey,
sir.
I just got to say, I don't think we can put Donald Trump in a category all by himself. Donald Trump resembles everything that the Republicans have already assembled. Now, let me say this. Everybody's got to remember that the Republicans blew the banks, put us into two unfunded wars, and they ran expenditures through the roof and failed to protect us from the worst attack on American soil. How did we forget the subprime mortgage scandal? When Harry Marco Polo, I think that's his name, tried to warn the SEC about the Bernie Madoff scandal, it would seem that we as Democrats cannot afford to put Donald Trump in a category all by himself.
Yes.
That is a big mistake.
Well,
we have to remember,
I don't entirely agree, Al. I think that because Donald Trump is a unique thing. I don't think that this country has ever seen anything close to Donald Trump. He's just so clearly unqualified to be president of the United States. But setting that aside, if your point is that the Democrats need to be putting forward a positive agenda and saying this is what we're for, we're going to have a conversation about that at the bottom of the hour, by the way. That's something that I totally agree with you on. And whether it's talking about Trump being an idiot or whether it's talking about Russia or whatever it may be, there's all this stuff that doesn't have to do with the day-to-day quality of life of average Americans, which are being destroyed by 35 years of Reaganomics and now Trumponomics and Bushonomics. I mean, it's just and neoliberal policies. Not to mention all the wars we're in and all this other stuff. I mean, it's yes, of course, we need to point that stuff out. Is that what you're talking about, Al?
I would like to say, and the Sherman, and not enacting the Sherman antitrust laws.
Well, that goes back to Reagan.
Like
that was 82.
The hands-off policy. What do Americans? Well, how many times do we have to get hit in the head before we realize what party is holding the bat? How many times? I mean, Tom, I don't mean to sound grandiose, but it just seems like draconian economics, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm with you. Al, thank you for the call. Good points all. And thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I have to read to you just, speaking of, speaking of crazy, this falls into the realm of how capitalism in its rawest form encourages, I'm talking about unregulated, raw, naked, just, red of fang and red of tooth or whatever the, sharp of fang and I forget the phrase, but you know what I'm talking about. Just raw capitalism, right? The kind that libertarians advocate. This is a letter from Martin Shkreli, Pharma Bro, the guy who jacked up the price of a drug that AIDS patients need from, $15 to $700 or something like that. He's being prosecuted for fraud. And he's not being prosecuted for screwing the people who bought the drugs. He's being prosecuted for screwing rich people, his investors. See, that's what you go to jail for in America. If you screw working people, no problem. You screw the investor class, your butt's in trouble. You got a problem. So he had a conflict with one of his employees. He had this guy buying stock. They were doing this kind of pump and dump thing, or at least that's what it looks like to me from this article by Stephanie Clifford in the New York Times today, where he was encouraging his employees to buy stock and to buy a really cheap stock, buy it and sell it, and buy it and sell it to try to get the stock price up. And one of his employees bought like 1 million shares of the stock or something like that for like $400. But instead of giving it to Shkreli, which is what Shkreli wanted, he kept it for himself and ultimately sold it for $1.5 million. Shkreli was furious that this guy didn't like act as a front for him, and so he sent a letter to his wife. And the letter says, "Your pathetic excuse of a husband needs to get a real job that does not depend on fraud to succeed. I hope to see you and your 4 children homeless. I will do whatever I can to assure this. Your husband's arrogance is infuriating, and making an enemy out of me is a mistake." I lack a word other than sociopath for that. Meanwhile, another blow for heartland workers / pensions. February is a bad month for Larry Burrell and thousands of other retired Ohio iron workers, writes Ed Liedfeld over at Money Watch. His monthly take-home pension was cut by more than half, from $3,700 to $1,600. Things have been tough in the Rust Belt, but this was a powerful punch in the pocketbook for Burrell. And it goes through this, how 400,000 members of the Central States Pension Fund are, basically this is happening to them. This goes back to during the Reagan administration. Before the Reagan administration, unions, companies, the whole bunch, you had to book pensions as a liability on your books. So if somebody came in and bought your company, they owed that pension. So if you've got a company that's worth $100 million and you got $1 million in pension obligations, your company's only worth $99 million because $1 million of that is called for as pensions. It was a liability on the books. During the Reagan era, they flipped that so that you could list pensions as assets on your books. And all these companies, all of a sudden, hey, look at all this extra money we've got. And then you had, the Carl Icahns of the world coming in and buying up the TWAs of the world to strip out the pension funds from the pilots and the flight attendants and all that. And it wasn't just limited to the airline industry. It has happened all over the place. And basically ever since then, pension protections have been disintegrating. And I hope I have my facts on this right. I'm going to check with an expert right after the break on this. But this is just so wrong. Not only, 400,000 people seeing their pensions basically cut in half. Not only is that a moral disaster, but it's also an economic disaster for our country. The thing that drives an economy is not how rich the rich people are. The rich people, when they get extra money, they stick it in their Swiss bank accounts. The thing that drives an economy is something economists call aggregate demand. It's the money in the pockets of people who spend 100% of their income, which is literally poor people and working class people. That's what drives the economy. And that's the people, on pensions. They're spending everything they get, stimulating the economy. You cut the money that they've got in half, you're going to slow down your economy. I mean, this is stupid on so many levels. It's incredible. Coming up after the break, Tom Perez, former Labor Secretary, head of the Democratic Party.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back right after this break at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. Welcome back to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It. This is from Chapter 3, The Rise of the Corporatocracy, and it's in the middle of the chapter. It's the subchapter or subhead is Feudalist Takeover. America was not conceived of as a feudal state, F-E-U-D-A-L, feudalism being broadly defined as rule by the super rich. Our nation was created in large part in reaction against centuries of European feudalism. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said in his lecture titled The Fortune of the Republic, delivered on December 1st, 1863, quote, "We began with freedom. America was opened after the feudal mischief was spent. No inquisitions here, no kings, no nobles, no dominant church," end quote.
founding idea of America was that our country would not be ruled by a handful of very powerful rich men. America was founded as a country ruled by we the people. And for democracy to work, there had to be a strong and broad middle class. Even at our country's founding, there were some who who couldn't quite shake the idea that aristocracy was the way to go. As Jefferson warned in a letter in 1826 to William B. Giles, there are even those who, quote, look to a single and splendid government of an aristocracy founded on banking institutions and moneyed corporations under the guise and cloak of their favorite branches of manufactures, commerce and navigation, riding and ruling over the plundered plowmen and beggared yeomanry, farmers and factory workers. This will be to them the next blessing of the monarchy, of their first aim and perhaps the surest stepping stone to it. The aristocracy that Jefferson feared rose first during the Gilded Age in the 1880s, when just a few companies seized control of much of America, including many of our elected officials. The major form of transportation and communication in those days was the railroads, and the railroads were owned by the Vanderbilts. The major form of energy then, as today, was oil, monopolized by John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust. And the major form of trade was in manufactured goods, which required factories, which in turn required steel, monopolized by Andrew Carnegie and his Carnegie Steel Company. These monopolists required ways to retain their hold on the money, so they turned to financiers like Jay Gould and John Pierpont Morgan, who set up large trusts for them. The Progressive Movement and then FDR beat back these monopolists with the Sherman Antitrust Act, the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, and other laws that regulated the game of business. Then Ronald Reagan, George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and George Bush Jr. came along and turned back the clock. Reagan fought the labor laws. Bush Sr. pushed for fast-track trade authority for the president. Clinton finally took down trade protections with NAFTA. And Bush Jr. put corporate executives into the driver's seat on government legislation. We've entered a new robber baron era. Today, the major form of communication is by phone and the internet in an area increasingly monopolized by the new AT&T, formerly SBC Singular AT&T. The major form of energy, oil, is controlled by just a handful of companies. Today's economic driver is the computer. Its software is monopolized by Microsoft, and its hardware is manufactured by a handful of oligarchs. Today, as in the Gilded Age, the rich are richer than ever. Forbes crows that in 2005, the rich got richer as the collective net worth of the United States' wealthiest climbed $125 billion to $1.13 trillion. That's greater than the gross domestic product of Spain or Canada. Bill Gates alone is worth $51 billion. 5 Walton family members, the owners of Walmart, made it into the top 10. Meanwhile, median household income fell for the 5th year in a row. In 1972, the median income for a person with a high school diploma was the equivalent of $42,600 in today's dollars. In 2002, the last year for which the National Center for Education Statistics compiled such numbers, a person with a high school diploma has a median income of $29,600. As the rich got richer, the rest of us got poorer, particularly what used to be of our middle class. The hallmark of the corporatocracy is monopoly. Fewer people holding more of the wealth, fewer companies holding more of the commons. The very competition that the conservatives claim to embrace is destroyed by the unrestrained growth of corporate interests. Big fish eat little fish over and over until there are no little fish left. And they eat the middle-sized fish until they're gone too. Look at the thoroughfares of any American city and ask yourself how many of the businesses here are locally owned. Instead of cash circulating within the local economy, at midnight, every night a button is pushed and the local money from all over America is vacuumed away to Little Rock or Chicago or New York. And the corporate lords want more. Not content with their hold over the private sector, they want to take over the public sector too. When Jeb Bush was governor of Florida and cut a deal with Enron to privatize the Everglades, it diminished the power of the Florida government to protect a natural resource and enhanced the power and profitability of Enron. Similarly, when politicians argue for harsher sentencing guidelines and also advocate more corporate-owned prisons, they're enhancing the power and profits of one of America's fastest-growing and most profitable remaining domestic industries, privately owned prisons. The cons look at the government's pollution controls and see regulations that get in the way of their profits. They look at single-payer health care and see a threat to the pharmaceuticals industry's practice of price gouging. They look at Social Security and see an opportunity for more bonuses for Wall Street fat cats. And on it goes. The book is Screwed. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
And welcome back. I'm so pleased and honored to have in the studio with me the former Secretary of Labor, the current chairman of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, Tom Perez. Thank you, Secretary Perez, Chairman Perez.
Tom is a lot easier, Tom. The two Toms are here today. It's great to be with you, Tom.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, what is the vision of the Democratic Party right now? What are we doing? What are you doing? But we too. I mean, this is a collaborative effort. I hope. I suspect.
Absolutely.
What are our priorities? Where do we go?
Sure. Our vision is shared prosperity for everyone. We want to build an America in which everybody has access to the American dream, a good job, a health care that is affordable and quality, housing security, physical security. You go to your neighborhood school, and it's a good quality public school. An education secretary who actually believes in public education. Right. The water that comes out of your tap is safe, and you don't have to worry about whether it's been tainted. That's the America we're building, an America of shared prosperity. And as you know, Tom, because you've been talking about this for years, our economy is way out of balance. The unfinished business of this recovery is income inequality. And the Democratic Party is fighting to make sure that everybody has a fair shake so that we can indeed build an America of shared prosperity. I don't believe the Gilded Age was a golden age.
No, it wasn't.
And we have this unmitigated assault on the labor movement, this unmitigated assault on Planned Parenthood, this unmitigated assault on lawyers like my wife, who's a legal aid lawyer, who helps folks who are living in the shadows. And as my friend Lee Saunders, the head of AFSCME, says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And there is a unrelenting effort from the far right, and they got a major league assist with this most recent confirmation on the Supreme Court, this unmitigated assault on the labor movement. And so our vision for the Democratic Party is to make sure we're out there fighting for a better future for everyone. And we do that by building strong parties everywhere, by having an every zip code strategy, and by building strong partnerships with the progressive movement, with our folks at a grassroots level, with faith leaders who understand that income inequality is a moral issue as well as an economic issue. And we've got work to do, Tom, and you know that. As we were talking offline, we've experimented over the last 10 years with the notion that we can win elections by having without having parties and a party structure that is particularly robust. And I think we know from the 10 years of all the elections we've lost, we've got to build strong parties and strong partnerships.
I have been calling for years. Back in 2008, as I recall, there was a group called the Concord, it wasn't the Coalition, Concord something, and they put a bunch of YouTubes up. Say that again? I think so. I think Concord Project, right, says. And it was funded, I believe, by the Koch network. It was one of these Tea Party groups. And it was basically how, as a Tea Party, and their YouTubes are still out there. You can watch them. In fact, I play them on the show all the time. This was a how-to to the Tea Party average guy or gal, the average person, how to take over the Republican Party. And they started out saying the most powerful job in America, politically speaking, is precinct committee person or precinct committee chair. And it was all about how to join your local party and become a precinct committee person, because they're the people who determine who the primary candidates are going to be. So if they could get like 4 Tea Partiers on the primary, then they know that a Tea Partier is going to be on the general election. And they're the people who write the platform or start the writing of the platform. And we've been having now for years people calling in, bragging on how, hey, I'm now a Democratic precinct committee person in Denver or in San Francisco or in Los Angeles, whatever. So, that's been kind of my focus on getting people into the party and building the party. I'm not sure what else to encourage people to do. thoughts, suggestions? Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
I think
you're
it's a great idea. And I mean, one of the things we've learned in our outreach is that there are a lot of places where we didn't have anyone doing that. When I was out in Kansas during the campaign for DNC chair, we learned that there were counties where there just de facto wasn't a Democratic Party presence, and they're changing that. And Kansas is a great example of what we can do when we organize, when we build the party and put our values into action. Donald Trump won Kansas by 14 points. The Democrats picked up 14 seats in the state legislature last year, Tom.
That's great.
In Kansas. And then you look now, I think there are 2 congressional seats. I think it's Congressional 2 and Congressional 3 in Kansas that we can pick up next year. Why? Because we're running good candidates. Our message is clear. We want a good education for everyone. I mean, you look at what Sam Brownback is doing in Kansas. It is radical right-wing engineering. And, that was the state of Nancy Kassebaum, a pretty moderate Republican. And Sam Brownback is the antithesis of that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an example of what you're getting at. When the Tea Party took over Kansas, what you saw was radical right-wing engineering that has decimated their healthcare infrastructure, decimated their educational infrastructure, and that is why we have a chance. But we only have a chance, it seems to me, Tom, when we're organizing. And we got to organize 12 months a year, because I distinguish between mobilizing and organizing. And we're pretty good at mobilizing, that 3-month sprint. But you know what? If you want to win elections, you got to talk to people now. And one new tenet of the Democratic Party is there's no such thing as an off year. We got to be out there every month of the year. That's why we're doing Resistance Summer right now, which is a down payment on that 12-month-a-year organizing philosophy that we must re-embrace as a party.
And yet resisting, this is what the Republicans did with your boss, Barack Obama. When you were labor secretary, is resist, resist, resist. It was basically the essence of pretty much everything they had. And you could argue that it worked for them, but we need to have, or we do have, a set of core values. You've articulated them: good health care, good education, things like an economy that works, more income equality rather than inequality. It seems like there's the kind of the vision of FDR that actually worked, and making the government the employer of last resort. He didn't get into healthcare. Harry Truman tried to first proposed single payer healthcare. So that that was kind of part of that whole making supporting labor unions, individual rights, all these things. That got picked up again by Lyndon Johnson with the Great Society, but that the Democratic Party, it seems to me, and to many of my callers, I think, hasn't just crystallized this down to bumper stickers yet. And perhaps it's because of the so-called conservatives still in the Democratic Party, or I'm not sure. You must have a hell of a balancing act that you've got to do, between these factions. But wouldn't it be wise for the party to say, okay, here are we are going to come right out and say we're in favor of single-payer health care, for example. We are going to come right out and say that we think that, we want to reverse specifically. So, we want to go back to enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act that Reagan stopped enforcing in '82, or we want to change the way the pensions are booked, again, from the Reagan era. Just very specific things. We're college for all. Some of the old Bernie campaign stuff. How do we do this?
The first point that you make that I think is imperative for us is we will continue to resist, and we will persist in that resistance. But we also have to articulate what we stand for. In my travels across the country, Tom, I hear repeatedly from folks, I appreciate what you're doing, in taking on all of the excess of Donald Trump, but that's not enough. What do you stand for? And we stand for shared prosperity for everyone, a good job for everyone, good health care for everyone. We believe that health care is a right for all and not a privilege for a few. And one of the silver linings of this health care debate is I met a lot of folks who said, I don't know the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. I don't know what the Democratic Party stands for. And what they're telling me now, as they see the excesses of this administration and they see us out there fighting against the Muslim ban because we believe our diversity is our greatest strength as a country. When I was down in Austin, Texas earlier this week at a rally to plant the flag clearly, because the most important issues confronting Texas right now, they have a terrible healthcare system. They should expand Medicaid. Their public education system is lousy. They need to improve it. They have to create better jobs that pay a middle-class wage. But is that what Governor Abbott is focused on? No. He's focused on bathrooms. And he's focused on demagoguing the immigration issue with the sanctuary city thing. And you know what? Those are such warped priorities. And when we're out there as Democrats, which is why I was in Austin, telling folks that we are here with you. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So when my LGBTQ brothers and sisters are at risk, I'm at risk. And when my immigrant brothers and sisters are at risk, we're at risk. When our labor union colleagues and Planned Parenthood are at risk, we're all at risk. And I believe we're making progress, Tom, because we have been clearly putting our values into action. People said we'd never be able to hold back the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And, they're going to keep fighting to repeal it. So nobody should be spiking footballs. And everybody should have their guard up. But you know what? The reason why we've had success so far is because, number one, the truth and the facts are on our side. But equally importantly, we've been organizing. And people like you, Tom, and the listeners here have been going to their members. And it's not just Democrats who have pre-existing conditions. It's every zip code. The opioid epidemic does not discriminate.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Republicans, and this is, I mentioned FDR like, okay, our ideas have been tried, and they work. The Republicans' ideas have been tried. They were tried in the 1920s. Harding ran on a platform of less government, less business. More business in government, less government in business. In other words, deregulate and privatize, and drop the top tax rate from 91% to 25%. He did both those things. That kicked off the Roaring '20s and took us right into the Great Depression. So we know the Republican policies don't work. We know the Democratic policies do work when we go back to them. And so the Republicans, as Plan B, have said, to hell with policy. We're just going to make sure people can't vote. And you're talking about this. You wrote this great op-ed. I'm not sure exactly where this is published.
This is in Time.
Time magazine. Thank you. DN, the Democratic plan to combat Trump's voter suppression commission. You want to tell us about this?
Sure. I was in Texas this week, and it's a great example. The Republican leadership in Texas, they can't win the battle of ideas because their ideas are wrong for the vast majority of Texans. So what do? They pass a voter ID law. They engage in racial gerrymandering. Let's have a battle in the marketplace of ideas, and then let's work together to make sure that every single eligible voter can vote. But voter suppression, we have to acknowledge, is a staple in the Republican playbook. I know that because I had the privilege of heading up the Civil Rights Division, and we had to sue South Carolina, we had to sue Texas, North Carolina, so many other states. This is a staple. We can't win on the ideas, so let's make it harder to vote, whether it's these pernicious voter ID laws, whether it's the partisan gerrymandering that we see taking place, whether it's the racial gerrymandering, whether it's the purges of voters, and most recently, as I note in this piece, this creation of the so-called Election Integrity Commission, which is the most misnamed commission, Tom, I've seen. And by the way, Chris Kobach, this radical right-wing social engineer who was sanctioned by a federal court literally a month or so ago for lack of candor in a voting lawsuit. Chris Kobach and integrity do not belong in the same sentence.
Are you familiar with a statement that Paul Weyrich made to a group of Republicans in 1980? Can I play this? Yes. This guy was helping run the Reagan campaign in 1980. Here it is, right here.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Now, that guy, he was the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, the co-founder of ALEC, and was helping run the Reagan campaign at that time. So the Republicans have been thinking about this. That was 37 years ago. So in the minute and a half we have left, what can we do? What can our listeners or viewers do?
Well,
to
make sure you don't allow this election commission to intimidate you. There have been reports in Colorado of people who are withdrawing their registration because they don't want the commission to have that information. With all due respect, that's the last thing we should be doing. You should be calling your friends and telling them to register to vote, because the best remedy here is to vote these folks out of office. So we need folks to organize out there and understand this. We need to be forming, and this is what we're doing at the DNC. We have a voter protection and empowerment unit that we're establishing and have established a 50-state strategy for voter protection. So I hope your listeners will volunteer with us, because we need to build that capacity, not just 8 weeks before an election, but we've got to be vigilant, because I have seen a lot of bad things happen in here in this context. I've listened to that tape you've played, and that embodies their philosophy. Voter suppression is here to stay, and we are not going to allow it. This is a matter of protecting our democracy, Tom, and this was one of the main reasons I ran for DNC chair. Too many people died for the right to vote for us to allow this to happen. We won't, and we're fighting back like all get out.
Good on you. Thomas Paine called the vote the beating heart of democracy.
Amen.
It's sacred. Chairman Perez, thank you so much.
Great to be with you and your listeners, Tom.
Great. Thom Perez, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee and the former Secretary of Labor, Obama.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More calls, your calls, and your comments right after this. Stick. This is a fascinating piece in The Guardian. What if nature, like corporations, had the rights of a person? And without going through the whole argument, the Te Uruwera Act is a law that was passed in New Zealand back in 2014, 2 years ago, and it extended to a 821 square mile forest the legal rights of personhood. The forest is sacred to the Tuho people, an indigenous group of the Maori, and for them, Te Tura was an ancient and ancestral homeland that breathes life into their culture. The forest is also to them a living ancestor. And this act concludes that Te Uruwera has an identity in and of itself, and thus must be its own identity with all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. Te Uruwera holds title to itself. Now, this is unique to New Zealand. This is brand new, but there are a number of places around the world where Native people, Aboriginal people, Indigenous people believe, and I would say that the Dakota Access Pipeline is an example of this, believe that the land is sacred and is their mother. We came out of the earth. Look at your body. Every single cell in your body is, made in part out of dirt. We are a product of the earth. What was it? Was it John Donne? Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, and the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is earnest, life is real, and the soul is not, and the grave is not its goal. Life, dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul, if I'm remembering my poetry right. And, dust thou art, to dust returnest. There you go, which I think is paraphrasing something from Proverbs. But in any case, the idea that here in the United States, what we have done, and this is like the absolute pinnacle of Cartesian thinking, right? Of the world as a dead machine thinking that Rene Descartes brought us back in the 1700s, or the 17th century, excuse me. The pinnacle of that kind of thinking is that something that is not alive, that's a human-made abstraction, a corporation, has the rights of personhood.
And they do. The Supreme Court has said this over and over and over again. Corporations are people. Mitt Romney, corporations are people, my friend. But nature is not. Nature, which is alive, does not have the right of personhood. Cannot sue or be sued. Doesn't have, any legal rights other than this 800 square mile forest in New Zealand, which is, like I said, brand new and expect more to come. So how different would our world be? How different would our country be if before an oil company could go in and rip up the land and inject poisonous water underground to frack out things, if they had to recognize the personhood of that land, the sacredness of that land? How different would it be if the lumber companies, before they clear cut a forest, had to consider all the living things in that forest? And the forest itself is a living organism. How different would it be if nature could have an attorney ad litem the same way that kids in foster care do? Or for that matter, just an attorney the same way corporations who are people do, or who are persons, not people. I think this is a great and important idea. So I wanted to share it with you. Welcome back. That was Tom Perez, the chair of the DNC. And I'm super happy to have on the line with us right now Dr. Loretta Johnson, the Secretary-Treasurer of the American Federation of Teachers, the AFL-CIO since 2011, a career educator. AFT.org is the website, the Twitter AFT Union. Dr. Johnson, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us. Tell us about what's going on there with the Radio Row and what the AFT is up to right now.
Well, the AFT has assembled about 1,400 educators from all over the country here in a conference to talk about the issues of funding of education. We were able to go up on the Hill and do a rally around the budget and healthcare.
That's marvelous. That is marvelous. Is the American Federation of Teachers, are there events going on nationwide, or is this just in D.C. right now?
I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. Are there events going on nationwide, or are you focusing today on the District of Columbia?
Oh, this is nationwide with all our locals. Today, we're just focusing here in the district because of all the things that have taken place with the health care and the budget cuts.
Right. I noticed that in Oklahoma, one of the big stories specific to that state right now is that a teacher has been out panhandling on the streets for school supplies. And she got some actually very favorable coverage from the local TV station on that. How bad is it out there?
It's very bad. The fight between vouchers and privatization and taking away from public education is causing a great deal of these kind of problems where teachers have to scrounge to get supplies and support, and most of the time they're spending money out of their own pocket.
Yeah. Wow.
Kids.
It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And as to help out, to pitch in, to know all about it, go to AFT.org, as in the American Federation of Teachers. Dr. Loretta Johnson, the Secretary-Treasurer, thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Great talking to you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 180. The subhead is the title is What We Need to Remember. The chapter title, the subhead is The Slavery, Losing Your Freedom of Civilization. In 1861, Mark Twain rode the railroad and overland stage across much of the United States, documenting his journey in a book, Roughing It, published in 1871. During a stagecoach ride near the Great Salt Lake, he encountered a group of the Shoshone-speaking Native Americans called the Ghost Suite, often referred to then by whites as the Digger Indians. Twain considered them, quote, the wretchedest type of mankind I have ever seen, end quote, and wrote, quote, they produce nothing at all. They have no villages, no gatherings together into strictly defined tribal communities, a people whose only shelter is a rag cast on a bush to keep off a portion of the snow, and yet who inhabit one of the most rocky, wintry, repulsive wastes that our country or any other man can exhibit. The Bushmen and the Gashoots are manifestly descended from the self-same gorilla or kangaroo or Norway rat, whichever animal Adam the Darwinians trace them to, end of quote. Even to this day, many people who have not bothered to study the Shoshone or other hunter-gatherer people imagine them in much of the same way Mark Twain did. Books and movies over the years have implied that their lives must be a continuous wretched struggle to find food from day to day, and that their cultures and religions hardly qualify as either. In that belief, however, Twain and many modern people are wrong. If the highest goal of contemporary civilization is to have leisure time, free from the demands of providing for food and shelter, so that one may then contemplate the great mysteries of life, then the Shoshone had achieved the pinnacle of success. Our culture teaches that civilizations like city-states come about as a result of technological innovation, such as agriculture, giving people more free time. With this free time, the story goes, they produce art, literature, religion, and explore the cosmos. Primitive cultures don't have these things because they don't have the time for them. In fact, these represent two of our most deadly myths. Leisure time. Every empirical study of both historic and contemporary cultures finds that the more complex and hierarchical a culture is, the harder the people in it must work and the more frantic their lives are. Just look at how many hours a week the average middle management executive works, about 60, and how many families have two 40-hour-per-week workers devoting 80 hours a week to paying the mortgage and feeding the family. Only a very small class of people within the city-state enjoys the leisure time state of freedom, its economic and political rulers. And because the ruling class is not producing food, those who are food producers must spend extra time making food for those who are not. The Shoshone require the same average 2,000 calories of food energy every day as do any other humans. However, they expend on average only 2 hours a day to acquire it, because they were a nomadic people who moved from place to place following their food supply. As the seasons changed and food became scarce in one place, they simply moved to another. If one food wasn't available, they knew where and how to find another. Toronto University professor Richard Lee found that the similarly structured tribal group, the Kung of the Kalahari Desert in Africa, spend less than 15 hours a week, 2 hours a day, attending to gathering food and the other necessities of life. The rest of the time, he said, they played, told stories, and made music. John Yellen of the National Science Foundation found the same to be true of the Hottentots, another hunter-gatherer group in Africa. The Shoshone had an elaborate and meaningful culture and religion. They generally did not suffer from famines or plagues. They had lived comfortably and happily on their land for at least several thousand, perhaps as many as 10,000 years, keeping the land as clean and pure and productive as it could be in that desert and mountain region, living harmoniously with their neighbors. At the time Mark Twain took his ride through their territory, the Shoshone had accomplished, over 1,000 years, a second achievement which is regularly touted by our leaders as the highest goal of humankind. They had eliminated warfare. There was not even a word for war in their language. The Shoshone lived a tribal life in one of the most desolate parts of North America, with a population density that ranged from one person every 50 square miles to one person every 100 square miles. A typical tribal unit was a single extended family of 5 to 20 people, and they traveled at a leisurely pace across a wide area. On those rare occasions when others, including whites, came to attack them, they simply ran away and hid. The occasions for attack were rare, largely because the Shoshone accumulated no wealth. They had no systems for preserving and storing food, minerals, or anything other than what they could carry. In this regard, they were not poor. Their lives were comfortable, their family interactions meaningful, and their food supply ample. A symbol of this is found in the highest status act a Shoshone could commit in the presence of others, to give them what he had. Generosity is how one achieves social standing among the Shoshone, whereas the accumulation and control of surplus food and possessions were how whites achieved social status. They were called the diggers by whites because they often dug in the ground for roots and food. Whites assumed this implied some sort of agricultural stupidity, but in fact the Shoshone had a deep and rich knowledge of life in their environment, both above and below the ground. They used a sacred digging stick to extract food, and it was both manufactured and transported with ritual and ceremony. If a stone had to be moved, a different type of stick was used. When a Shoshone looked out at the natural world, she saw a landscape rich with life, both visible and hidden. That life was known to her, called to her, spoke to her, and often guided her. Last Hours of Ancient Thought.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Throughout the day here, the American Federation of Teachers is holding this conference here in Washington, D.C., and we will be bringing guests in for short interviews, just an FYI, for the next couple of hours from the conference. So that should be interesting. In the meantime, as promised, picking up your phone calls, and anything goes summer here. Jim in Jupiter, Florida. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Good. I'm doing fine. You know, I was going to talk about the data center in Utah, the new one they're building, but I just want to say that when Tom
Perez
came on there, thanks for keeping him on point. He first came on there with the 2018 platform. This is what it sounded like. And he sounded like a used car salesman trying to sell a 57 Buick rusted out with no wheels as a brand new Lexus. And I just think it just goes over bad. The only thing that we need to do is get that voter system correct. Yeah. And we will take care of the rest. We will vote.
Well, I think the Democratic Party needs to have specific platform positions that it holds. The Republican Party has, a whole bunch of very specific positions. More tax cuts for the rich, more tax cuts for corporations, less health care, for average people, kill off Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. They're very clear about this. They're very specific about this. And, I tried to press him on, for example, single payer, Medicare for all. He wasn't going to go there. And I get it. He's running the whole party. And so he's got to respect the, from the Joe Manchin wing to the Bernie Sanders wing, right? Which is not going to be an easy job for anybody. But I really think that until the Democratic Party consolidates a little more, like the Republican Party has done. Now, the Republican Party has done it because they got all this billionaire money in there. But the Democratic Party should be doing it because we know that our ideas work. As I pointed out to him, they've worked before. We saw them demonstrated. The proof of concept was the American middle class from 1940 to 1980. And the Republican Party's ideas since 1980 have just decimated this country. So I'm with you, Jim.
Yeah, and the only problem is that the Democratic Party really had a chance to demonstrate, unless you go back to the 40s and the 30s and 40s, what it can possibly do.
Right.
In the 60s. We haven't seen anything like that in the last 30 or 40 years. So if we could see that level of demonstration of change and progressiveness, we'd be 100%. I mean, that'd be the end of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know that the Republican Party is in favor of trashing trans people with their bathroom bills. I remember when Jack Kennedy said we're going to send a man to the moon and bring him back in 10 years, and we did, by the way. And, so the Democratic Party has, and Lyndon Johnson declaring war on poverty. Contrast that with Richard Nixon declaring a war on drugs that ended up putting over 1 million people in prison. Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty lifted millions of people out of poverty. It's like, what clearer contrast do you need? But you have to have specific policies. And I am hopeful that the Democratic Party can start coalescing around policy specifics, around, this is what we believe in. Yes, of course we believe, healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. How do you implement that? Well, let's go with H.R. 676, or if that's not a perfect bill, or the bill that everybody likes, let's invent a new one. I'm sure John Conyers would be just fine with that, But let's Medicare for all. But let's just do it. I mean, I would think that it would be as simple as having enabling legislation that simply says, the eligibility age for Medicare shall drop by 10 years every year, by a decade every year over the next 6 years, and that would give the whole Medicare infrastructure time to ramp up to bring in all these new people, and it'd be very simple and straightforward. Anyhow, Jim, great suggestions. Thank you for the conversation. Good talking with you. Diane in Cicero, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Are you there?
I am. Yes.
Okay. Hi. I called about what you talked about before you interviewed the guy before.
Tom Perez.
With the Tom Perez, about the bill that they're putting through today for nobody can say anything against Israel.
Right. It's not today, but it's queued up, and it has over 230 sponsors in the House, and it's got over 40 sponsors, just short of 50 sponsors in the Senate. And you could go to jail for 20 years for saying, gee, I think maybe we should boycott Israel because of the way they're treating people in Gaza.
Right.
Or for any reason, actually.
Obviously, read the Constitution. They should all be out of their offices by 5 p.m. today.
I agree. It's a clear violation of the First Amendment's right to free speech.
Yeah, my head almost exploded when you.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, Diane, this is something that is well, maybe it's not catching on the right. Actually, well, we'll see. We'll see.
Well, stupid might be contagious, and it's coming from the top down.
Yeah, there you go. Diane, thank you for the call. Well said. Adam in New Orleans, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Adam, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? Every depression throughout history can be linked to a contraction in money supply. And as you pointed out, Tom, tampering with aggregate demand will create that contraction in money supply. Is there any recognized inflection point that you're aware of, something based on a predictive modeling where the economy suddenly turns? How will we know when to batten down the hatches for depression? Is it a 3% change? What is it we're looking for?
Right. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, Adam. I have some pieces. Aggregate demand, which is the ability of average people and poor people to buy things, is what drives the economy. The job creators in the United States are the people who make less than $100,000 a year. I mean, all the way down to somebody living on $10,000 a year. They're the job creators because they're the ones who are buying things which create demands. It creates demand. But and back when I was a kid growing up, back when I was a young whippersnapper, we actually had a labor section in the newspaper when I was growing up in Lansing, Michigan. And I don't remember if it was the Detroit Free Press or the Detroit News, but one of them had the labor section and the other one had the business section. One was the labor paper, the other was the business paper. And the labor section used to have every day kind of a state of the art or state of labor, and it would talk about what wages, how average wages were fluctuating literally from day to day in Michigan and around the country, and how union membership was changing. And those were metrics that actually told us the quality of our economy. And to the best of my knowledge, those metrics, if they are being gathered, they're not being gathered in a way that they're easily accessible. I mean, maybe through the Labor Department. It would have been a good question for Tom Perez. But to the best of my knowledge, they're not being. So we're instead looking at other things. And other things influence aggregate demand. For example, when the stock market crashes,
the biggest hit that's taken, in theory anyway, is by stock market investors who are the wealthy. But in reality, typically, when the stock market crashes, the very wealthy make out very, very well. It's why some of the largest fortunes in the United States have been made in the last 10 years. I'm talking about people going from being worth $3 billion to being worth $30 billion. And we saw the same thing in the Great Depression. Some of the greatest fortunes in the United States were made in the 1930s and early 1940s. So you could say that, you know, in terms of how it hits aggregate demand, the problem is that Reagan and the whole, you know, Republican Party, but during the Reagan era, the idea was get people off Social Security because we want to privatize it and turn it over to the banksters. And so we've got to replace it with something. So what do we replace it with? IRAs and 401ks. And so as a result of this, a lot of people have a good chunk of their retirement money right now in the stock market. It's not big money. It might be $20,000, $40,000, $70,000, something like that, $100,000. But that's their retirement money, and it's in the stock market. So when the stock market takes a hit, average working people take a hit too, as we saw in 2007, 2008. And when they take a hit, that kills or that harms aggregate demand. There's and then you know, the availability of credit, the velocity of money. You know, as you're correctly pointing out, the size of the money supply, which is a function of, you know, banks make money by loaning money. People borrow money when they think that the economy is going to get better. They stop borrowing when the economy is getting worse. That shrinks the money supply. So there's a whole bunch of moving pieces to this, Adam. I don't have a single number that I can point to. Thank you for the call. It's a great one.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. It is 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Greg in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Greg, thanks for watching us on ThomHartmann.com. What's up?
Tom, hey, how's it going? I called in last week talking about libertarians, and sort of you bring up a lot of excellent points that no other radio host brings up. I really like about auditing the Pentagon, jury nullification, and aggregate demand. I really agree with all those stuff. But if you don't mind, I wanted to convince you of something, which is that libertarians did not start in 1980. The Libertarian Party and the Koch brothers is what you always go back to. But if you actually go further back, there's so many things. I came with a list of 10 things that liberals and libertarians agree with, and I hope you don't mind. Can I ask you if you agree with these 10 things?
All right.
First, opposing the war on drugs.
Sure.
I would say both progressives and...
Well, libertarians don't care about the war on drugs because it doesn't cost them anything. You know, if you're a billionaire, the war on drugs doesn't help you, it doesn't hurt you. So let them get rid of their war on drugs. Okay, what's next?
Okay, even though it's the government that goes after people who don't hurt anybody.
The war on drugs has no impact on David Koch. He doesn't care.
Right, but that's okay. So I think the misunderstanding is you think libertarians are only following David Koch and Bill.
I think the libertarians, virtually every libertarian policy works to the benefit of the billionaire class. Yes, I believe that. And let's go through your list and see.
Yeah, let's go through the list. Gay people should have the same rights as everybody else.
Right, and libertarians have gay people in their families, and gay people do not hurt libertarians financially in any way. It's not going to make them richer or less rich, so they don't care.
They don't care? You're saying they don't care if the government oppresses people who don't hurt anybody else? That is their whole...
No, I'm saying that, you know, from the Koch brothers' point of view, if gay people want civil rights, so what? That's fine. Give it to them. Doesn't matter to us. We're billionaires. Gay people getting married isn't going to hurt us. What's next?
Okay. Just as an aside to what you said, libertarian thought goes back to classical liberalism. If you think about Bastiat, Lysander Spooner in the U.S., John Stuart Mill in England, individual liberty and property is what they talked about. It's just that liberals and progressives diverged in the 20th century, but they still have a lot in common.
Yeah, if you want to debate John Stuart Mill, we can, but I thought you wanted to talk libertarianism.
Sure,
John Stuart Mill was writing in the 1860s.
Sure, police brutality and institutional racism is obviously the government. Jim Crow laws, segregation, that was government. That was...
Yeah, absolutely, and this is where libertarians, again, are going to say, hey, it's David Koch would say, it doesn't hurt me if the government stops killing black people. It's not going to reduce my fortune, so sure, we'll throw them that bone.
you do realize that people like Milton Friedman were alive before David Koch was even born, and
Sure.
he was a libertarian.
Yeah, I do realize that, yes.
Okay.
And I think Milton Friedman didn't care either.
No, Milton Friedman cared a lot. He spoke constantly. He wrote about this.
Okay.
And in fact, the Civil Rights Act is a great example of how the government actually intrudes in people's lives, because institutional racism was much worse before the Civil Rights Act, and it was all government. Okay, continuing. Anti-war. The Pentagon does need to obviously be audited. It can't account for trillions of dollars, and yet we pay for more and more war out of our paychecks every month.
Right.
And I agree with you, but that is a libertarian position to not pay for a giant government machine.
Yeah, and this is how you can see the fault line between libertarians and neoconservatives. The neoconservatives are the ones who are tied to the war industry. The libertarians, by and large, are the ones who are tied to the fossil fuel industry. So, hey, wars are not all that profitable to the Koch brothers, but they are profitable to the defense contractors. So the neocons love wars. The libertarians, we don't need wars. In fact, let's keep that money at home so the billionaires can get even richer. Greg, we're running out of time here. I'm sorry. Thanks for the call.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And is Jessica Tang on the line? She is. Wonderful. Jessica Tang is on the line with us, the newly elected president of the Boston Teachers Union, BTU.org. She is live from the American Federation of Teachers Radio Row. You can tweet her at Jess Tang, J-E-S-S-J Tang, excuse me, J-E-S-S-J Tang. President Tang, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. So tell us about the Boston Teachers Union and what your goals are as the new president. And also, this is fairly consequential. It says that you are the first person of color to head the union, the first member of the LGBT community, and the first woman in more than 3 decades. Congratulations.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm very, very proud and honored to represent the 10,000 members of the Boston Teachers Union. We represent not only teachers, but also paraprofessionals, guidance counselors, social workers, school psychologists, nurses, OTs, SLPs, a lot of different professionals who work in the Boston public schools. And I would say, our number one goal, of course, is advocating for quality public schools. And one way that we're trying to do that right now is through our contract negotiations. So unfortunately, we haven't had a contract since August of 2016. And so that is obviously a priority. And we really do see our contract as a way of creating the teaching and learning conditions that our students need and our teachers need to be able to be successful.
So what are the biggest challenges that you face as teachers and as a union?
I mean, there's many. One of them, I think, is just constantly fighting this anti-union narrative. I think that as union membership and density has declined, we lose the history of how much unions have actually bettered and improved, grow in the middle class and improve working conditions that everybody benefits from. So I think that's definitely a challenge as we are seeing, legislation that's trying to take away collective bargaining rights and, pull back a lot of the gains. In terms of the contract specifically, we are constantly fighting, I think, budget cuts, which then really limit our ability to create, get the resources and the full staffing we need. For example, we don't have a full-time nurse in all of our schools, or a librarian. We have libraries sometimes, but not the librarians to staff them. And so when you when we think about funding, people are like, oh, there's like, well, people always want to ask for more money. Well, yes, because we never really fully funded all of our public schools in the first place. I mean, we've got to be the only profession where we have to buy our own paper. And, you know, this is crazy sounding, but when I first started teaching, had graffiti on my desk. So I like power sanded my desks and shellacked them so that they looked new.
Wow.
Because we didn't have funding for new desks. And so these are some of the challenges. And also, again, just respect for teachers and respect for the profession.
Is Massachusetts a right to work for less state?
It is not. Okay. It is not, actually. And here's a fun fact, you know, for those who want to blame teachers and unions for school issues, is that the highest performing states, actually, according to the NAEP, which is like the nation's report card, they're all heavily unionized. You know, Massachusetts is number one, and we are one of the most heavily unionized states, and they all are at the top. And the ones that are actually have the poorest scores are the ones that do ban right to collective bargaining or right to work. Do
you see these battles between the Betsy DeVosses of the world, these weird billionaires and some who even call themselves progressives or whatever? I mean, the Silicon Valley billionaires who are, you know, promoting this idea of so-called school choice. Do you see that as is that the biggest challenge that you're facing right now? In my opinion, this is all kind of meta to an effort to, there's public education, there's a lot of money in it. Why are the billionaires not making that money?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly a challenge because, again, when you have under-resourced school districts, philanthropy ends up playing a really big role, because even if there's a small percentage of the funding that goes into the school district, when you need more and are under-resourced, then the philanthropy can kind of say, well, we want you to do this if you want our money. And then they have just like disproportionate influence and policy. And that is problematic because, I strongly believe that teachers are experts. We are knowledgeable. We are on the ground. And those of us in schools are the ones who should be informing policy. And, you can assume best intentions of some of these philanthropists. But even so, their ideas, if they're not actually reflective of the reality of what's happening in schools and on the ground, can create really harmful consequences. And that's, I think, what we've seen. I can give a concrete example. In Boston, the Gates Foundation had this idea that if we just broke all of our big high schools into smaller schools, then we'd have better growth and student achievement. And the experiment didn't really work. But now we're trying to put our schools back together again. And I want to say, hey, can we have funding to get our schools back together again, since that experiment didn't work?
Right.
And that's a problem too, is our students should not be experimented on.
Yeah, I would think particularly with something like a high school, a science classroom, which can be very expensive, you'd want to amortize that over a larger base of students.
Right.
In order to have a high-quality one. It's remarkable. Jessica Tang, the newly elected president of the Boston Teachers Union, btu.org. You can tweet her at Jess J. Tang, Jessjtang. President Tang, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great talk. Keep up the great work. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be picking up your calls at the bottom of the hour. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016, one of my favorites. In her writings, this is from page 62, by the way, a middle-class primer is the chapter title. In her writings, which have become foundational for libertarian theology, author Ayn Rand suggested that the only purpose of government should be to prevent oppression by force. What she neglected to consider was all the force inherent in nature. If you're hungry, there is the force of biology. If you're homeless, you confront the force of winds, storms, ice, and rain. If you're sick, you confront the ravages and force of disease. These were the forces that provoked the first governments, the first communities, the first clans and tribes, the first nation states. It's easy for libertarian elitists, such as multimillionaire TV talking heads or college kids reading Atlas Shrugged, to talk about how there should be no government beyond police, the army, and courts. They all have enough resources that they don't need to deal with the forces of raw nature. And that explains why billionaires would bankroll libertarian-leaning think tanks that will, when the crash comes with its full force, tell us it was caused by big government. However, in the real world, humans must confront both nature and other humans, which is why we create governments and why we create economies. But it wasn't until 1776 when Thomas Jefferson placed John Locke's right to life, liberty, and property, or replaced it, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the idea of a large class of working people had the ability to pursue happiness, the middle class. It wasn't until 1776 that that was even seriously considered as a cornerstone obligation to government. This is also the first time in history that the word happiness had ever appeared in any nation's formative documents, as Jefferson wrote in 1817 to Dr. John Manners, quote, "The evidence of this natural right, like that to our right of life, liberty, the use of our faculties, the pursuit of happiness is not left to the feeble and sophisticated investigations of reason, but is impressed on the sense of every man." As Jefferson realized, with no government interference by setting the rules of the game of business and fair taxation, there could be no broad middle class, maybe a sliver of small business and artisans, but the vast majority of us would be the working poor under the yoke of elites. The economic royalists know this, which gets to the root of why they set out to destroy government's involvement in the economy. After all, in a middle-class economy, they may have to give up some of their power, and some of the higher end of their wealth may even be redistributed, horrors of horrors, for schools, parks, libraries, and other things that support a healthy middle-class society but are not needed by the rich, who live in a parallel but separate world from the rest of us. As Jefferson laid out in his 1816 letter to Samuel Kercheval, a totally free market where corporations reign supreme, just like the oppressive governments of old, could transform America, quote, "until the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Then begins indeed the bella omnium in omnia, which some philosophers observing to be so general in this world have mistaken it for the natural instead of the abusive state of man." Although this may come as a sudden realization to many, we've really known it all our lives. In fact, in the 6,000-year history of the civilized world, a middle class emerging in any nation has been such a rarity as to be largely historically invisible. The United States has had two great periods of what we today call a middle class. The first was from the 1700s to the mid-1800s and was fueled by virtually free land for settlers, stolen from the Indians, and free labor, slavery in the South and indentured immigrants in the North. The result was, as de Tocqueville pointed out, the most well-educated, politically active, middle-class non-aristocrats in the world. The second period didn't take hold until after World War II, during my dad's lifetime. Unlike the first, which was fueled by free land and slaves, the second had to be carefully constructed with specific and what some might define as socialist policies put in place during the New Deal, which asserted more democratic control over the economy and workplace in order to keep the economic royalists in check. To both stimulate and balance the domestic economy, FDR reinstituted progressive taxation, which gave workers more to spend and gave the rich an incentive to pay their workers better to maintain a stable workplace, since if they took the money themselves, it would just mostly go to taxes, thus stimulating demand for more goods and services. Progressive taxation has a long history. As Jefferson said in a 1785 letter to James Madison, quote, "Another means of silently lessening the inequality of property is to exempt from taxation all below a certain point and to tax the higher portions of property in geometrical progression as they rise." FDR eventually hiked the top income tax rate paid by the super rich in America to 90%. This had a twofold effect. First, it held income inequality in check and ushered in an era of equal income and a growth among all classes. Unlike the Gilded Age, when the economy grew at a blistering pace but the gains were afforded only to the robber barons, the period between 1947 and 1980 saw unparalleled equitable growth. During these 30-plus years, the poorest fifth in America saw a 116% increase in their incomes. The middle fifth, 111% increase. Top 5% only saw an 85% increase. All income classes shared in the prosperity of the times when the top marginal income tax rate was above 70%. The second effect of a high income tax rate was to bring stability to the economy. And then it goes through the whole explanation of how that worked. The book is The Crash of 2016.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
This is an amazing story. Over at Center for American Progress's blog, Think Progress, and Tasha Geiling writing, Donald Trump has nominated for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, the U.S. Department of Agriculture overseeing the safety of our food supply. You would think for the #1 science position at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Undersecretary of Research, Education, and Economics. This is it's like a, kind of a #2 position in the USDA. It's typically been held by a scientist. And Donald Trump just nominated Sam Clovis, a right-wing talk show host, to be our nation's top food scientist. The guy has no experience or background in the field. No scientific degrees. He's not a scientist. He's got a degree in economics, and he's a right-wing talk show host. And it just seems to never end, Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. It's like I told you, commented about 2-3 months ago. Every day, it's like a new chapter from the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it really is. And now today we're discovering that Donald Trump thinks that health insurance costs $12 a year and that the price stays the same until you're 70. It's crazy.
Yeah, the healthcare ferry does 12 a month. Yeah, it's
apparently. Yeah.
I hope Leader Perez accepts and endorses Medicare for all, because that's how we'll really win if we go back to our FDR roots and things like that and get this on, because this is what our country needs.
I agree, and I'm hopeful that the party can put together a platform and say, and this would be perhaps a little more. I guess this is where I was trying to get with my conversation with him, where I said, you have conservatives in the party, and then you've got the Bernie, you get from the Joe Manchin side to the Bernie Sanders side. But that, arguably that's true of the Republican Party as well, but that doesn't stop them from saying these are the positions that we believe in. And these are the policies that we believe in, not just the broad principles, but the actual policies, the actual plans.
Exactly.
We'll see where it goes.
Talk about McCain here, but I agree. We have to have a list of things that we believe in and bullet points, and we need to
and do it like Newt Gingrich did. His 10-point contract on America. Put together 10 things and say here's our checklist. These are the things we want to accomplish. If you give us power, this is what we will do.
Exactly. You were right on another thing, too, leading into the McCain thing. You had spoken a couple months back ago about a hospital having a whole wing of people doing the insurance billing and stuff and dealing with insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was at a specialist the other day, and the specialist told her, she says, yeah, we just had to hire 3 people just to deal with these insurance companies. And it sounded like she was definitely for single payer.
Yeah.
And that would be a really good thing. And that's from a specialist. And also, John McCain has a brain cancer diagnosis.
Right.
And it's quite ironic. Here he has this brain cancer diagnosis, which could be fatal, kind of like Teddy Kennedy's.
Yep.
And
it's actually the same glioblastoma, glioblastoma, however you say it, but it's the same cancer. Yeah.
Yes. And here he is. He belongs to a party which right now we're in the process, and it's been an ongoing process, where they're trying to strip away health care from millions of people who are going to also die. And the ironic thing as well is Senator McCain, John McCain, he would probably endorse and vote to, for Trump care. And this, what kind of a country does this?
Well, we don't know for sure where John McCain stands on this. His last statement on Trump care was that there were a bunch of things missing. It was a a wishy-washy but broadly negative statement. But, you know, John McCain is, you know, I'm reluctant to politicize his getting brain cancer, but I do think that it points out that, you know, cancer doesn't, you know,
No,
1 in 3 people in
won't.
America is going to get cancer at some point in their lives.
Everyone's going to get sick. Everyone's going to die. Everyone's going to need health care at some point. Sickness and problems know no party lines.
Yeah, life is a pre-existing condition which inevitably ends in death. It's real simple, and we should all be covered for it. Steve, well said. Thank you so much for the call. Jeff in Las Vegas. Hey, Jeff, what's up? Thanks for listening on Sirius XM.
Yeah, Tom. Okay, let me answer that libertarian guy that you had on. There's a big difference between tolerance, which anybody could be tolerant about the gay and lesbian, transgender community. But that's a big difference than supporting and embracing a group of people that have been hammered and called names and saying by the religious community that they are living a lifestyle in sin. So it's very easy to say, yeah, we're for that, but they're really not. These libertarians are not for that. Let me just say this. After 30 years mainly supporting conservatives, I did vote for Bill Clinton, but besides that, I've supported Republican conservatives. I can't, after maybe the last 18 months, I cannot support these policies anymore. I cannot support the religious bigotry that I've heard and that I know people on my end that continue to do this. And if I could, this is my voice to the progressives. I went on in my state in Nevada, messaged the senator who won. If I could help in any way, I gave money to the DNC. I told the DNC if there's anything I could do practically in my state, because locally it's very important, that whatever state you live in, you have to hammer to get Democrats back in if they're not in control of the houses. You have to support with your money also. It's a nice thing to say, I support, but you have to put feet on the ground and then you have to give your money too, because that's going to make a big difference on somebody that maybe doesn't have a lot of money. So I'm saying I have some conservative views, like conservative, but I think for the most part up to this point, and I love your show, I've listened a long time, I think you've had a good effect on me of reevaluating my views to say, like you said, progressive ideas have prospered when they've been in the whole community, middle class, even the working poor class. And so I'm on board. I'm with you, and I appreciate your show, and I'm going to continue to locally. I mean, we need to win back the House, obviously, in the Senate. That's on the national level.
Right.
So we could work on that. But I think more importantly, if you progressives, us together locally too, can do this, then I don't see how we could lose in 18. I just don't think, and like you said, we need a 10-point thing. This is what we're going to do, like the Republicans do. And if you get people like me to come across, then we're gonna win back. And I think that's my message.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jeff. And also, you know, we've got to see through the BS. Frankly, I mean, you know, the libertarians now. In fact, I had a conservative on a month or so ago about criminal justice reform, and she was pitched to us as a criminal justice reform expert. And I had no idea what her politics were. Turned out that, you know, it was funded in part by the Koch network, and she was, you know, called herself a conservative. And she's like, you know, we've got to do criminal justice reform. It's crazy that, there's so many people of color in jail and that America has more prisoners than anywhere else in the world. And I'm thinking, why do the Kochs care about this? Well, because they'd actually thrown some money at this thing. Maybe not the Koch brothers themselves, but the broader network. Why do these right-wing billionaires care about this? And then I discovered that part of their criminal justice reform, in addition to undoing the war on drugs, is something called mens rea. Now, mens rea means, state of mind. And so what they're saying is, essentially, that right now, if you are the CEO of a company, or if you're a senior executive with a company, and you say, let's say you got a refinery going someplace, and you say, this refinery, the safety stuff in this refinery is costing us $1 million a year. I want you to save 20% on that. And so they cut back on that, and as a result of cutting back on the safety features of the refinery, somebody dies. Well, right now, that executive could actually be held criminally or at least civilly liable, and arguably both. What these libertarians are suggesting is that you have to prove mens rea. You have to prove that that person actually intended somebody to die when they saved money on safety. And in exchange for that, we'll help you get people, nonviolent criminals, out of jail. So basically, they want protection for white-collar criminals. And, it's like so wrong. And it's virtually every Republican policy or any of these policies being promoted by these right-wing think tanks, when you dig down at the very bottom, what you find is some way to back the billionaires. Jeff, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to Sirius.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And, we're going to check in with Talk Media News. And welcome back. John, watching Free Speech TV in Long Beach, Mississippi. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for receiving my call. I appreciate it.
Certainly.
I'm thinking about leisure time. And through this technology, specialization, and productivity, it benefits only the very rich. It's totally out of control. Specialization is alienating us and stratifying us to the point to which we can't even work on our own cause. And we're becoming totally dependent upon the technological world.
Well, is that the narrowing of the spectrum of data and information, or is that simply the expansion of the sophistication of technology?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the productivity and sharing in profits have been going one way, where people who work and they should be able to share in those profits, and they don't.
Oh, I agree.
And taking it a little step further, as far as the technology is concerned, and the system itself, it seems to me as though they're dumbing us down, where we don't even feel as though we can do the work on our own cause or anything else. And with the advancement of this specialization, not only is it alienating us and stratifying us from one another, but it makes us feel as though we can't even think for ourselves. We should share in the profits, and we don't. I mean, if a company is producing, let's say, apples, I don't care what they're producing, and their profits are shooting through the sky, those people who are working there are doing the work. So why can't everything be split down the middle where everyone gets a share of the profits? Why does it have to only go one way? I think taking money out of politics is one thing I agree with, but also taking the money out of the cooperative world and letting them know that we all should benefit from the fruit of our labor, not just to be exploited.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, and I think that worker-owned cooperatives are a great thing. I've written 2 books that the last chapter of each one of them, Rebooting the American Dream and Threshold, both those books, the last chapter is a call for worker-owned cooperatives and alternative economic systems. And in the meantime, at least the people get a decent wage and decent benefits. John, I'm with you. Thank you for the call. Well said. George in Eureka, California. Hey, George, thanks for watching Free Speech on the Dish Network. What's on your mind?
Well, basically, to go along with the rest of the criminal justice stuff, I'd like to have all criminals, all felons, registered as 501c3 non-taxable for their very the idea they cannot vote. Yes, we don't have a prescriptive right.
Well, they cannot vote in 9 states, I think it is.
Well, how many people is that?
It's millions. I mean, it's tens of millions.
Yeah, so basically, since they cannot vote, they cannot be represented, therefore they shouldn't be taxed. And 501c3 organizations are not taxed, and also they are not capable of influencing political discussion.
Well, you could simply pass a law that says that, you know, anybody who has lost their right to vote also no longer has to pay taxes. But
yeah, that's it.
You know, the goal, though, isn't to give people a tax break. The goal is to shame the states, those mostly southern states. In fact, I think they're all southern states, where when you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote for the rest of your life. To shame those states into at least going, as with most of the rest of the states in the United States, that once you have finished your parole and you've got the keys to the society back, you know, you're rehabilitated, that you actually regain your right to vote. But your suggestion of using tax as a leverage is a good idea. Thanks, Drew. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us, Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So what's going on in the world today?
About 22 million people would lose health insurance coverage in the next decade under the most recent version of the Senate's Obamacare replacement bill. According to a new Congressional Budget Office analysis, 15 million would lose it by 2018. Now, because of the legislation retains 2 of Obamacare's taxes, the CBO estimates it would reduce the deficit by about $420 billion by 2026. So the number of uninsured is essentially unchanged from the original draft of the legislation. Premiums would rise until 2020, when they would be about 30% lower than under the current law. But most older people would still face higher premiums than younger people. Now, the CBO did not score an amendment added to the bill by Senator Ted Cruz.
Oh, no, that's the giant hole.
Yeah, they're waiting for that. And experts are expecting that this is going to be considerably more expensive. And senators are saying it could take weeks for the CBO to score this Cruz amendment. And so so those numbers are likely not to be available when the Senate votes next week. Republicans have been saying, leadership, that they could use instead a Department of Health and Human Services analysis, which would be very unusual, rather controversial, because it would essentially be an in-house analysis. So
we get to tell you whatever numbers we want to tell you.
Well, more favorable.
Yeah. And by the way, Victoria, none of that really matters. I mean, you know, because as Donald Trump told the New York Times yesterday, and I quote, basically, you're basically saying from the moment the insurance, you're 21 years old, you start working, and you're paying $12 a year for insurance.
Yep.
And by the time you're 70, you got a nice plan. And here's where you walk up and say, I want my insurance. I think he's mixing up whole life insurance, which he no doubt has, with health insurance.
Yeah, I was a little confused by that.
Many of us are very puzzled. But he said the same thing in May, except in May, instead of $12 a year, it was $15 a month. But other than that, the quote is almost identical.
Down. This is good.
Yes.
I'm encouraged.
Right. So why worry? Be happy. Yeah.
Be happy. Now, meanwhile, according to a Daily Beast report, the Department of Health and Human Services has been using government funding earmarked for efforts to educate Americans about the Affordable Care Act to produce anti-Obamacare online videos.
Right, over 130 of them?
Yes,
something like
apparently so. So you know about this then?
Yeah, I read the article today, but I haven't shared it with my listeners, so go for it.
So the report cites several unnamed sources at various agencies and on the Hill, says the department used its internal studio to film testimonials of people who say they've been hurt by Obamacare. Then they used these to create more than 100 videos. And HHS also used taxpayer money to pay for the travel costs of these people who flew to D.C. to be interviewed for the videos. And then the department posts these videos to the HHS YouTube channel, describing the families and doctors as, quote, burdened by Obamacare. But wait, there's more. The Trump administration has also used official Twitter accounts to promote Republican efforts to repeal Obamacare, while the HHS website also features a banner that sends people to a page arguing that Obamacare has done, quote, damage to health insurance markets. So Democrats have asked the government to look into whether HHS is misusing the funds in an effort to sabotage Obamacare.
I would think the answer is yes. The question is that illegal? Does the legislation say, you have to use this money to inform people about Obamacare, or does it say, which is kind of neutral? In other words, you could either inform them good or inform them bad, or does it say you have to use this money to help people learn how to sign up for Obamacare, how to sign, or the Affordable Care Act, or how, what the benefits of the Affordable Care Act are?
Right. How was it written? And I don't know the answer to that.
That's going to be the key to the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says he plans to continue to serve in his post as long as that is appropriate.
Yeah, this is a man with no self-respect at all.
And of course, the question is, why did he say that? He said that because President Trump appeared to throw him under the bus in an interview with the New York Times yesterday, when he said, as I'm sure you discussed this with your listeners, that if he had known he was going to recuse himself from Russia and anything to do with the elections, he wouldn't have put him into the job in the first place.
Right. And how does he know? First of all, he's saying, if I had known before Sessions had the job that he was going to recuse himself. But I don't think Sessions knew that before he had the job.
I don't think Sessions could possibly have known before he had the job. And anyway, but the Department of Justice guidelines say you have to do that.
Yeah. So Sessions really had no choice. But, unless those guidelines are not enforceable, and there's no enforcement mechanism associated with them. But I'm just astonished that Jeff Sessions has so little self-respect that his boss would trash him to the New York Times and he would say, I'm going to hang on to this job. I mean, that's pretty grim.
As long as it's appropriate, he said. We don't know how long that is. Also, Trump in the interview implied that he might fire Special Counsel Bob Mueller and said that it would cross a red line if his investigation of Trump's finances went beyond Russia. Well, hey presto, Bloomberg reports today that the Special Counsel investigation of Russia's interference in the election has expanded to look into business transactions of President Trump and some of his associates.
Yeah, and Deutsche Bank, which is his, he couldn't get any American banks to fund him after all his failed businesses and horrible bankruptcies. And the only bank he could find was Deutsche Bank.
Yeah, so
what's going on there?
So it'll be very interesting to see what happens next. Senators want the new FBI director on the job as soon as possible. Christopher Wray is advancing, and Mitch McConnell wants to see him confirmed before the August recess. It looks likely the Judiciary Committee unanimously approved his nomination. Looks like he will most likely go through.
Yeah. Okay. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate the report. It's always great to hear your voice. We will be back with more of your calls, my thoughts, the news of the day. And, toward the end of the next hour, Christine Pellegrino, New York State Assemblywoman, is dropping in. So, but we'll be back. Anything goes somewhere.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
And welcome to Thom Hartmann University, our book club. And today we're reading from Ralph Nader's Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. This is from page 74, the chapter How the System is Rigged. According to Russell Mokaber, editor of the Corporate Crime Reporter, quote, corporate crime takes far more lives, causes far more injuries and diseases, and steals far more money than street crime. But the vast amount of law enforcement resources, mass media attention, and prison cell blocks are devoted only to street crime. Just consider these preventable casualties. Almost 60,000 annual workplace-related fatalities from both disease and trauma. 54,000 deaths a year from air pollution. Over 100,000 lives lost as a result of medical malpractice. Nearly 100,000 lives lost from hospital-induced infections. Over 100,000 fatalities from adverse effects of drugs. And over 40,000 deaths every year due to inadequate or no health care coverage for diagnosis, treatment, and medication. There are far larger numbers of sicknesses and injuries attached to these data sets. These statistics have haunting human faces. Children, women, men, and families destroyed by uncontrollable, monetized minds. Whether they are caused by recklessness, criminal negligence, or worse, the key factors in common are the preventability of such pain and the suffering inflicted from commercially induced neglect, predation, manslaughter, and homicide. By comparison, street and home homicides do not exceed 14,000 lives lost annually. Now see how companies have made sure they have the laws that they need to go after you, and how they make sure that the law can be used as their punisher. The giant multi-tiered home mortgage business, now driven by the same 1%ers who profited from crashing the economy in 2008, can nail you if you misrepresent information on your mortgage application. Suppose you say you're going to occupy your house as a principal residence to get a lower interest rate and down payment, and you don't for some reason. Lenders can call the loan and demand repayment if the mortgage balance is outstanding. Absent that payment, the lender can seize your home, foreclosure. In addition, by claiming you committed bank fraud, these companies can use the FBI against you. As the veteran housing columnist Kenneth R. Harvey warned, this can trigger severe financial penalties, prosecution, and prison time for ordinary Americans. But how many bankers feel the cold metal of handcuffs tighten on their wrists when their crimes rob American families of their homes and life savings? Health insurance companies have similar supporting laws to deny medical coverage by alleging illegal activities. This could mean anything from non-disclosure of traffic violations to gun accidents, even when there has been no conviction. It could mean something as vague as hazardous behavior, according to the New York Times. If a company paid you and comes back for their money, they can get you prosecuted for fraud. These corporate Goliaths are too big to fail. If they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are, and they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are too small to stop them. Corporate state culture, the plutocracy whom oligarchy is given an astonishing exoneration, so long as it claims that violence and mayhem are not their direct purpose, but an unfortunate byproduct that just couldn't be helped. Like when innocent people are accidentally killed by U.S. drone attacks, the government seems to quietly get a free pass. It's almost as if corporations get away with a permanent defense of an institutional insanity, a defense going global in terms of deadly supply chains, from horrific African mines to dangerous factories in China, India, and Bangladesh. Deoxygenation and poisoning of the vast oceans, estuaries, rivers, and lakes. Upping greenhouse gases into rapid climate destabilization. Extending the range of infectious diseases due to habitat and ecological disruption and desecration. And changing the nature of nature itself through unregulated genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Even with 6 million slow, agonizing deaths a year globally attributed to the tobacco business, cigarettes are still demonically promoted by 1%ers who reap staggering profits from selling their addictive and poisonous product, especially in developing nations where regulations protecting children do not exist. The excuse is forever that corporatists have no intention, knowledge, or reason to do harmful things. The institutional insanity defense again. Or the manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction, whose militant advertisements say they are just helping the national defense, but are not at all responsible for their products' use in the coercive policies of empire and perpetual war. Is it institutional madness or infantilism? Did the World War II allies let the giant Krupp works in Germany get away with this excuse after the war ended? It's time for people to take away these rationalizations of omnicide from corporations that demand they be legally privileged as persons for their pursuit of profits, but not as persons for our pursuit of them as criminal predators and refugees from justice. In the 2012 U.S. presidential campaign, Republican nominee Mitt Romney, asked about corporate personhood, replied that it was a given, saying, "Hey, corporations are people, my friend," like it was a science fact he learned in 5th grade. This is no mere throwaway line. Billions of dollars of litigating, advertising, marketing, and corporatist commentary have been focused on driving this people image into our minds from childhood. Regularly, full-page ads show that Goliath corporations like Walmart or Lockheed Martin are just people like you. The ads are filled with pictures and names of the faithful workers who bring you goods and services. The book by Ralph Nader, Breaking Through Power.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I want to commend to you an op-ed in today's New York Times. It's by Vanita Gupta, and it's titled "The Voter Purges Are Coming." The Trump administration's Election Integrity Commission will have its first meeting. Well, this was written yesterday, so on Wednesday. To map out how the president will strip the right to vote from millions of Americans. And that's exactly what it is. They're not interested in making our elections more secure. The BS and excuses that we're getting out of the Republican Party are the exact same excuses that were used to justify Jim Crow laws in the South, well, not just in the South, all over the United States, prior to the 60s, where they would say, well, we've got to have a literacy test. Somebody has to be able to recite, one of Shakespeare's sonnets when we ask them to, because otherwise you're going to have dumb people voting. And everybody understands that we need to have, smart people voting, right? We don't, you don't want, and of course, this was all code for, for racializing the vote, for suppressing the vote of people of color. And for some reason, when white people showed up to vote, it was the literacy test was, what's your home address? And when black people showed up to vote, the literacy test was, please recite the entire United States Constitution. And yeah, it did get that weird. So whether it was literacy tests or poll taxes or, any of the zillions of other ways, I mean, they figured out all these different ways to suppress the vote during the Jim Crow era. They're doing the exact same thing now, only under color of law. Well, it was under color of law before. And saying, oh, we're doing it for the good of the nation. No, they're doing it because this is the only way the Republican Party can hold on to power. And Vanita Gupta points out, lost amid the uproar over the commission's request was a letter sent by the same time by the Justice Department Civil Rights Division. It forced 44 states to provide extensive information on how they keep their voter rolls up to date. It cited the 1993 National Voter Registration Act, known as the Motor Voter Law, which mandates the states help voters register through motor vehicle departments. Now, it didn't, the Justice Department is not saying, how are you enforcing this law? How are you doing the good stuff? Instead of saying, give us your information. You know, Chris Kobach, Ken Blackwell. Ken Blackwell was the guy who printed ballots on 10 or 20 pound paper and then and distributed them in largely in neighborhoods of color, and then decided that those ballots couldn't be counted because they were printed on paper too light. That it had to be 40-pound paper, 60-pound paper, or whatever it was. And the pound is like, you know, how much, it's not a actual, this is how much a ream of paper weighs, but at one point in time in the distant past, that's how they used to, you know, identify paper. And so it's kind of carried forward. But in any case, and then Hans von Spakovsky and J. Christian Adams, these guys are all vote suppressors, naked vote suppressors. I mean, this is just, it's just amazing. And Vanita Gupta was the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, writing this article in today's New York Times, or yesterday's New York Times. Really worth checking out. I encourage you to check this out. And I'm still scratching my head about why Donald Trump doesn't know how healthcare works. And finally, Jeff Sessions, Eric Erickson wrote this over on The Resurgent. This is a conservative website. Conservative website. Eric Erickson, right-winger to the bottom, you know, from the top of his head to the bottom of his toes. And he writes, Attorney General Jeff Sessions has long prided himself on asking if things are constitutional before proceeding, but the constitutionality of his desires has run crashing into his law and order views. He has decided to expand a positively unconstitutional policy that should be ruthlessly fought in courts and legislatures across the country. Jeff Sessions wants to seize the property of Americans accused of crimes, even if they are never found guilty by a jury. And I would add, even if they never plead guilty or plea bargain. In other words, completely innocent people. He goes on to write, Eric Erickson, civil asset forfeiture has long been the government's preferred means to confiscate property from suspected drug dealers and others. The problem, however, is that often the person is found not guilty or found innocent. He says not innocent, he means innocent, by a jury, and the assets are unrecoverable. According to the Department of Justice Inspector General, the Drug Enforcement Agency alone has seized more than $3 billion from people not charged with a crime. You get this? $3 billion. In one case in 2016, Oklahoma police seized $53,000 owned by a Christian band, an orphanage, and a church after stopping a man on a highway for a broken taillight. The home of a self-described soccer mom, suspecting she was not in compliance with the state medical marijuana law. This is another one. They proceeded to take every belonging from the family, including tools, a bicycle, and her daughter's birthday money. I got an email from Brian Pruitt, a conservative here in town, who is a regular guest on our TV show, and I think he's been on the radio show a few times. And Brian's a good guy, and you know, we disagree on a lot of things, but he's a decent human being. And he sent this to me this morning saying, you know, conservatives are really upset about this. And I'm like, yeah, so are liberals. This is something that we all can agree on. This is just wrong. Rudy in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Rudy, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I want to talk about the ID law, but before I do that, I think I want to add something to your earlier discussion with Tom Perez. They should really add an affirmative right to vote to the DNC platform. I think that would be a good message. So the ID law, are you aware that the TSA will no longer accept regular driver's licenses from sometime in 2018?
Well, yes and no. There are only, I believe, 3 states now that have not fully complied with the provisions. I don't remember the name of the law that was passed, but it was passed some years back. And if your I'm pulling my driver's license out to look at it here because D.C. is in compliance. if your driver's license has a little star that says and a USA next to it in the upper right-hand corner and a hologram on it, then TSA will accept that. And there's just a couple of states that are not doing that. And they're not doing that, I think, out of, not wanting to have a national registration of people or something. I frankly don't remember the argument. But
what happened to me, I'm not a citizen. I'm a resident, permanent resident.
Right.
And so I went to the driver's licensing place here in Washington State and asked if I could get the enhanced driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
And they told me, no, as a permanent resident, you can't. You have to be a citizen. So I asked, so what documents do I have to bring? So essentially you have to prove that you're a citizen to get the enhanced driver's license.
Right. So, but TSA will, if you're not a citizen, you presumably have a passport from another country, Rudy, and TSA will accept that as identification.
No, they don't. So I wonder whether all the people who can't prove citizenship to vote will also not be able to get.
Rudy, I go through airport security all the time with people using non-U.S. passports as identification.
But I'm talking about local people who can't prove that they're citizens.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a big problem, and this all goes back to voter suppression. You're right. And all these voter ID laws are about voter suppression and people, and this is why they disproportionately hit, poor people, people who live in cities where there's good public transportation systems and they don't own a car, they don't need to have a driver's license, and elderly people who have, kind of aged out of their ability to drive, their driver's licenses are no longer valid. So, yeah, those are all good points. Rudy, thank you for the call. And thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls after this break. And welcome back. Margot watching Free Speech TV in St. Augustine, Florida. Hey, Margot, what's up?
Hi again.
Hey, Margot.
I had a discussion with a friend of mine, and we were talking about Obamacare, and she said she didn't think it was right that people be forced to have health care. Well, I said, what about car insurance? Oh, that's different. Now, I want to ask you, as a genius in my mind, and I wish I could remember 1/10 of what you say, how many accidents do people get in versus medical incidents in their lives?
Wow, that's a great question, Margot. Certainly, I think everybody goes to the doctor at least, probably once every 4 or 5 years for something. And a lot of us, have made it all the way through our lives without ever having a car accident. I mean, I've had one bad car accident in my life. My wife has had none at all. She's quite proud of that fact. So, and we're in our 60s. So I think your point is really a good point.
Okay, one more thing that I've been thinking of, and for years, I figured out a way to get rid of car insurance. Nobody's going to like my idea, but I don't know how much gas price would take it, but 2 or 3 cents a gallon, and everybody would get rid of car insurance, and everybody would be covered, which would be similar to what we're talking about as far as insurance for health.
Oh, so you're suggesting basically single-payer car insurance funded by the gasoline tax?
Yep.
Huh. Interesting. Let me ponder that. I would have to consider the consequences, but let me think about it. Margot,
we always have to pay for uninsured motorists here in Florida.
Yeah.
And it's a no-fault state, so no matter which end you're coming out, you're getting it.
Yeah, yeah. You are always you provide thought-provoking ideas, Margot. Let me scratch my head on that one for a day or two and get back with you. But thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Brian, watching Free Speech on the Dish Network in Dubuque, Iowa. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Brian.
How you doing? Yeah. It's really hard to keep up with you, Tom. You know so much, and Are you there, Tom?
Yeah, I am. This is not a Trump cabinet meeting, so you can just get
okay.
you can get right to it, Brian.
I was not for Trump. Let's get that straight.
No, it was a bad joke about people who praise.
That's all right. We all want to say a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. So you got 45 seconds, Brian. What's up?
Okay. All right. I was born crippled. Got my feet fixed at Shriners Hospital. Dad left my mom for another woman when I was 5. My mom married a great guy right after that. 6.5 years later, he was killed and died. He had 2 sons my age. One of them was Lieutenant Colonel in Special Forces. I told you about that. I was in a terrible car accident where a lot of people were hurt. It took me a year and a half to recover. When I was 18, I told you about that. When I was 20, I went back to California to start my life again, and then had a mental breakdown after breaking up a fight and trying to confront the people. And they came after me, and it turned into a massive amount of fear and then paranoia, blah, 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 and all that. I went through all that, caused a mental illness, been mentally disabled for a long time. I'm coming out of that after 27 years. I'm 49, and I grew up in a relatively white area, but not. I was on a border town of Chicago, and very integrated. Anyway.
I get it. Brian, I'm sorry we're out of time. Thank you for sharing your story. We'll be back.
On April 15th, 1949,
my shaves are super. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Is Gavin on the line with us? He is. That's great. Gavin Grimm is with us, 18-year-old transgender activist and recent high school graduate. His website, facebook.com/Gavin Grimm, GRIMMVA. And you can tweet him at Gavin Grimm VA. Gavin, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. So tell us about also with the ACLU's help, you have sued for the right to use the boys' bathroom at your school, and you say it's not about bathrooms, but about trans people's right to exist in public spaces. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. So the rash of bathroom bills and legislation that's aimed at keeping trans people out of bathrooms speak to a much broader issue, and that is keeping trans people out of public space entirely. Because imagine just for a moment if you could only use the restroom at home, for example, or there was a select few public places where you were able to, and so you would have to plan your days out around where you could stop, or if you had to run home, if you could be close enough to do that, it makes a lot of things very difficult. School is one example, work is another. It's just impossible to function in public life if you don't have that kind of accessibility.
Right. Yeah. But it's not. I mean, it seems to me that this whole bathroom legislation that Republicans are promoting now in Texas, so they're on this thing, Governor Greg Abbott. That this really isn't about anything other than demonizing people for not being, basically straight. Do you think, understanding this correctly, or am I missing something?
No, I think that you gave me a great chance to speak to something. I think that sexuality and gender are two things that are often confused when they're completely separate. there are trans men that are attracted to women, trans men attracted to men, trans men attracted to men and women. The same thing with trans women. Sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with gender. The demonization of trans people is based in not a rejection of things that aren't straight. Although with people that do correlate the two things, certainly that adds in. But it is a fundamental misunderstanding of who trans people are, what it means to be trans, and a dislike, I think, on a basis of sets of deeply held beliefs that account for those kinds of bigotries.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification and recalibration. Well said. Tell me about this your case, this ACLU case.
So it's currently, we are before the Fourth Circuit again. This is the second time, and oral arguments are going to be on September the 12th of this year. Previously, we were up facing the Supreme Court, but the Trump administration rescinded guidelines put out by the Department of Education, which said that trans students should basically be treated like normal students and be able to use correct facilities. And once those guidelines were rescinded by the Trump administration, the Supreme Court declined to hear the case.
So what do you think is, how best can people who want to support trans people do that?
Educate yourself, educate others, and I mean, on a very, very basic level, just be nice. Don't discriminate.
I have a nephew who's trans. In fact, I presided over his wedding, and so I'm not unfamiliar with the topic,
right.
or the people, and yet I said this, kind of blundery thing of, oh, it's about being straight or not, and thank you for correcting that, and I really appreciate that. What's the best way for people to learn more and be more, be a better advocate for trans people who are not trans people?
Right. Well, I mean, embrace the trans people in your lives. Most people do have a trans person in their lives, whether or not they necessarily know that. This can be a coworker, a neighbor, acquaintance, a family member. Listen to trans people when they say things. When, for example, when someone tells you, hey, that question is upsetting, or I don't want to talk about that as it relates to their transition or what have you. Listen to them, respect their feelings, respect them as people, respect their identities. In everyday life, if you hear someone discriminating against or making generalizations about or anything negative regarding the community, correct them if you can. Just take very basic steps to be overall more welcoming and more kind to your fellow human.
Yeah. And I think your point about the, separating sexuality from gender is a really important one that there's just not a broad understanding of.
Right. Your comment was interesting because, unfortunately, people conflate the two very frequently. And so a lot of people, their understanding of trans people is that they're just weird gay people. You know?
Well, that wasn't what I was trying to say, but I get that. And what I was trying to say is basically not, not
not
cisgendered, yeah.
Which is
cisgender. Or cisgender. But, remarkable. Gavin Grimm, you're doing great work. Gavin, thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thank you.
And educating me, along with our listeners and viewers. I appreciate it. And you can tweet Gavin at GavinGrimmVA. And good on Gavin. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oh, and Gavin's website is facebook.com/GavinGrimmVA. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction. We fight wars all over. This is from the last chapter, chapter 6, titled Staving Off Extinction. We fight wars all over the world for oil, and we don't even need it. That in and of itself is insane. But when you look at a 250 million year old piece of sedimentary rock and see that it's virtually barren of fossilized life forms, you realize that this is a hell of a lot more important than whether or not our country is going to fight stupid wars in far-off lands so the oil companies and the Koch brothers can continue to get rich. This is about the survival of life on this planet, at least as we know it. To hold back extinction, the human race must immediately limit carbon emissions. There are a number of ways to do this. To start with, governments around the world can simply set a limit on carbon emissions and begin fining businesses that pollute beyond that cap. If we want to make it more politically palatable and throw in some profit for the banksters who own so many of our politicians, we could also let businesses and banks set up an exchange and trade carbon credits. Businesses can buy the right to pollute or sell the consequences of their good behavior. In that way, the banksters get to skim a piece off the top, just like they've managed to do with pretty much everything else. This is our best chance to stave off extinction. However, it's politically impossible, at least for now. Although as the consequences of global warming further manifest themselves, political will for a hard cap will undoubtedly build, just like it did with sulfur dioxide that caused acid rain back in the 1980s. It's rarely discussed in the press, but President George Herbert Walker Bush successfully pushed through a cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide, which radically curbed acid rain. It's to buy humanity time in the short term, we may have to settle for a more modest proposal, such as a carbon tax. The concept is simple. Put a price on pollution. Under a carbon tax system, a business would pay, for example, $20 for every metric ton of carbon that they spew into the air. As of 2013, 33 countries and 18 smaller jurisdictions around the world have already put some sort of a price on carbon. In February of 2013, China, the world's largest polluter of carbon, announced plans to implement a carbon tax themselves. And the European Union runs a carbon cap-and-trade system. In 2010, Congress nearly passed a comprehensive cap-and-trade law that would have kept carbon emissions at a rational level and required businesses that wanted to pollute beyond the limits to buy carbon credits on the market from other businesses that were polluting below the level. Though that measure died by a Republican filibuster in the Senate, elsewhere around the world, carbon taxes are flourishing. Alongside the EU's cap-and-trade system, several other European nations are also taxing carbon. They include the nations of Scandinavia, the UK, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Ireland. Other like-minded countries include Costa Rica, which funnels tax revenues from carbon polluters to indigenous communities to help fight deforestation. South Africa, where new auto sales include a carbon tax, and full-scale carbon tax across most other industries have already been implemented. And India, which has a carbon tax of 50 rupees per ton on coal produced or imported into India. South Korea and Japan have also passed carbon tax measures. Several provinces in Canada have carbon taxes. And here in the United States, there are local carbon taxes in San Francisco, Boulder, and Montgomery County, Maryland. While quietly, business leaders and even Republican lawmakers are coming around to the idea of extending a nationwide carbon tax. For a moment, consider exactly what big oil is doing to our planet and how much money they are making in the process. The 5 biggest oil companies in the world, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and ConocoPhillips, dump roughly 1 billion pounds of carbon into our air every single day. A modest carbon tax that would cut their daily profits by about $10 million and still total for them a staggering $332 million in profits every day is something they can afford as one part of a comprehensive energy policy. It's the bare minimum that carbon polluters should be paying, considering the damages they're inflicting on our planet. Pollution costs, like global warming, are called externalities. These externalities also include the medical costs of increased asthma and cancer care associated with 1 billion pounds of pollution being burned into the air above our communities every single day. They include the costs of ecological devastation caused when oil rigs explode in the Gulf of Mexico or tankers run aground and spill open off the coast of Alaska. They also include the military costs of deploying armies around the world to ensure that the oil spigots in hostile regions keep flowing and the shipping lanes remain open. And they include the costs associated with climate change, costlier storms, rising sea levels, flooding, and agricultural devastation. Carbon polluters themselves pay for few, if any, of these externalities, but instead they try to pass the bill along to all of us affected by their pollution. That needs to change to prevent disaster. When the day comes that businesses know pollution is at their expense, they will begin to reduce their carbon emissions. Capping carbon levels alone won't work. Research out of the MIT Global Change Institute assumed a $20 tax per ton of carbon pollution, increasing 4% every year, and found that it would only modestly curb emissions. This carbon tax scenario falls well short of even the White House's goal of cutting carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. And it would come nowhere close to staving off the projected temperature increases that could take our planet over the extinction tipping point. So a carbon tax needs to be part of a broader plan that not only eliminates incentives for the use of carbon-based fuels, but altogether phases them out and replaces them with new, cleaner energy alternatives. This will require massive government investment in research and development. It's basically calling for a new Manhattan Project. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction by Thom Hartmann.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Catherine in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Hey, Catherine. Thanks for listening to WCPT. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I've listened to you many times. I'm a first-time caller.
Well, thank you.
I was very interested. I've kept some tabs on the Gavin case, and I was so glad that they're going back through it. And I was listening to your interview, and one thing I was going to comment on is a lot of the time the misknowledge of who we are is somewhat our own fault. We tend to be the person who we really are. I'm not that guy from years ago. I've always been this woman. And I finally became and accepted who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, I absorbed myself into the woman's area. So nobody really knows. Old friends know me. The new ones don't. They just know Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tend to fade out of society, so nobody really knows us.
Yeah.
But in my own instance, I did try to transition more publicly. I have told some people about me because I want them to know about us and accept us for who we are. You know, and another problem that we have is because we always tended to be ourselves, we were never really out in public. So we didn't have the numbers to push for legislation or everything.
Right.
So we kind of banded together with the LGBT folk. So now it was the LGBT. So now we have the numbers to fight for legislation. But the con to that is now the public is confused. All the other alphabet characters stand for something sexual. Well, for us, it's not a sex issue.
Right, it's gender.
It's a who we are,
or identity.
Gender issue.
Yeah.
So that kind of confuses people. So I think part of the problem is our own. I am now selectively going out where I volunteer in other places, and I sit down and I explain who I am, how I became who I am, and all that. So I'm now letting people know who used to think, oh, trans people, oh, they're these strange characters, or sex people, or whatever.
Yeah, or the old drag queen appellation.
Yeah, we're not cross-dressers, we're not all that.
Right.
And I'm not coming down on them, but we're not that.
Right.
So a lot of people I know have really changed their opinion. Yeah. And I think we need to be more public in who we are. Of course, that's hard in the Trump days.
Well, it's hard even without Trump. I mean, trans people are at a higher risk for everything from murder to suicide.
Exactly.
We've
been put down so much. Yeah, suicide has taken a lot.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's just some of the comments I wanted to make.
Well, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope my mentioning my nephew didn't come across like, yes, I know a black person kind of thing. It's some of my best friends are Jewish, or those kind of gratuitous statements. I didn't mean it gratuitously. I think we lack.
I understood where you were coming from.
Thank you. And I think that we lack. I mean, saying trans versus cis, most people will give you just a completely blank stare. and it's almost like we need a little more in the English language to explain this to people who have no understanding of it. And I think Gavin did a really, really good job of correcting me essentially when I used that straight, and he was pointing out hey, that's a term that you use that refers to sexuality, not to gender, and we're talking about gender here, or identity even. I would even expand it beyond gender to identity, because there are some people who are even suggesting that they've kind of transcended gender, that they're genderless, and consider them trans. So it's a fascinating thing. Catherine, thank you so much for the call.
Thank you, Tom.
Good to hear from you. Thank you. Vicki in Harvard, Illinois. Hey, Vicki, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I just wanted to call and ask your opinion on how much is the trans community being used to pass bills that have things in those bills that are impossible or very difficult to get through. But once that part of it, the trans bathroom usage, once that becomes part of it, then it gets passed.
I don't believe that any of the anti-trans bills that have come down, have buried deep inside them things like tax cuts for billionaires, if that's what you're talking about. I think that they're...
No, I had done some research on it originally, and they had a bill in Texas several years ago, and I can't remember what it was about exactly, but there was something that the Republicans couldn't pass, and then they added the bathroom issue, and it passed. And then I know North Carolina did something very similar with the minimum wage and the, what was the other part of it? The sexual harassment, I believe, at work, in your workplace or something. That was also in part of that bill with the transgender being in the bathroom.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I'm wondering how much of this might be a usage to cover up something that, you're going to be more, what's the word I'm thinking of? You're going to be more passionate for something that you don't understand or you don't believe in,
or you're afraid of. Actually, I think conservatives are spreading fear of people who are not. Again, this is where we lack a word. It's because normal is a word that implies that somebody who's not is not normal, and I think that being trans is part of the spectrum of normal, but. How would they describe it, right? I mean, how would the people who are the Fox News viewers, who are freaked out about trans people because they don't? Oh my God, what's this? I don't. And how do we language that? But it makes a lot of sense that the business community that wants to be able to discriminate in employment, and wants to be able to exploit people who are. The most fragile among us, or the least among us in some regards, the most vulnerable among us. That's really the word I'm looking for. I'm using the wrong language here, wants to exploit them and pay them less or whatever. It would make a lot of sense that they would tie those two things together. I'm not sufficiently well informed about the content of the North Carolina or the Texas bathroom bills to know if they have those things in them, but it wouldn't surprise me at all, Vicki. I need to do a little research myself. But thanks for the call and thanks for raising the issue. I'll check it out. And thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Great, thank you, Vicki. Have a great one. Jamie in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Jamie, what's on your mind?
Hey, I'm all right. I'm just, I'm a Southerner. I grew up in Mississippi. I live in Texas now. I'm a veteran. I've been around a lot of Republicans, as you can probably imagine.
Sounds like it.
But I'm not one. And I've never been one. I'm from a part of the country who, without FDR's Work Progress program, would still look like Appalachia. And I'm always wondering, how do we win back what I call working class liberals, what they call Reagan Democrats?
Right. We do it with specific policy prescriptions, and this is, in my opinion, where the Democratic Party needs to be going, is saying we are in favor of everybody in America having access to trade schools or college for free after they graduate from high school, because this is an investment that we make in society that will produce enormous returns, both financial returns for our government and societal returns for all of us.
We are in favor of everybody in the country having access to health care, period. You know, without deductibles, without all this nonsense that the insurance companies throw at us. We are in favor of a single-payer Medicare for all system. We are in favor of stopping climate change and moving to a decarbonized economy, and which will create millions of new jobs and develop wonderful new technology, and it will also minimize the risk of all of us being wiped out by anything from an extinction on the worst case scenario to superstorms and sea level rise in what arguably is increasingly looking like just the best case scenario. And those are just 3 issues, right? And put together a list of 5 or 6 issues or 8 or 10 issues and say, this is where we stand. This is what we believe. These are the specific policy prescriptions that we have. And when the Democratic Party does that and does it clearly and unambiguously, as, for example, Bernie Sanders did in all his speeches as he traveled around the country, and ultimately as the Democratic Party platform got to, and to a large extent as Hillary Clinton was doing, when the Democratic Party does that and says, these are our specifics, at that point, I think Americans start saying, oh, well, that's good. We can go for that. Yeah, I like that. So, and it's not like it's a brilliant new strategy. Newt Gingrich did this in the 90s.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's just that Newt was lying about it. His 10-point contract on America, 6 of those 10 points were tax cuts for billionaires. We'll be back. And welcome back. Joan in Elk Creek, Virginia. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you. You do a great job. And I think a previous caller had mentioned something about nonprofit programs, 501c3s, not having to pay any taxes. And I am the director of a nonprofit adult literacy program in Southwest Virginia. And we pay an enormous amount of, I only work 10 hours a week, but we pay a lot of employee taxes and a lot of other taxes.
Sales taxes.
So I'm not sure what he was talking about, but we do pay taxes.
Yeah, you're exempt from property taxes and from income taxes, though.
Right.
Yeah.
But,
but I think what he was trying to say is, and doing it inartfully somewhat, or at least raising an interesting question, which was, if somebody has lost their right to vote, they no longer have representation. And one of the founding cries of this country was taxation without representation is not a good thing. So if you don't have representation, should you have to continue paying taxes? And I said, I don't think that that's the way that you're going to sell it, although it's a good point. But, the inability to vote after one has finished with parole is simply nothing more than an echo from the old South where the majority of the people going to prison were people of color. And so they wanted to make sure that they never had an opportunity to vote, particularly post-1965. But you're absolutely right. I've run nonprofits. I've started nonprofits, and nonprofits do pay taxes. They just don't pay property tax. And
I'm sorry. Maybe I was in the other room, so I didn't hear the whole.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good, Joan. And
I think we should use our tax money, as you just said. Hallelujah. We need to use it for education and health care, and our military has enough funding, I would think.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm totally with you, Joan. I want to move along and get one more call in here before we hit a break. Thank you, Tom in Joshua Tree, California. Hey, Tom. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'm calling with regards to the Department of Interior's, actions towards reducing or eliminating some of our national monuments.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that's been concerning me particularly since I live on the edge of a national park that once was a national monument, and that we have new national monuments in our region here in the California southern deserts, and the idea that these lands have been, pretty well figured out for quite a while on the public interest with regards to the merits that they had to be made national monuments to begin with. And some of the arguments coming from Secretary Zinke saying that there wasn't any public comment when I participated in a meeting with Dianne Feinstein where there were over 1,000 people showed up. and I'd say 97% of that crowd were totally in favor of dedicating our new national monuments, and with some pressure down to the last minute of the Obama administration that it finally happened.
Yeah, but Zicke, you have to understand, Ryan Zicke is a shill for the big mining interests. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The petro-billionaires and the other mining, they want to, or timber or cattle, interests. I mean, there's a lot of people who want to exploit our public lands for their own profit, and they pass off big chunks of money to these so-called conservative Republicans like Zicke, and that's what he's doing, and that's a terrible thing. I'm with you, Tom. Thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Paul from Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Let me say three things about health care. The first one is that I think the notion that we can spread and win people over with is that health care doesn't fit the traditional insurance model. I may have said this before on your program, but it doesn't fit in terms of the way it's very well done with insurance works well for your car or your home. You total your car. If you have collision, like let's say my mom did, like a few months ago, she got in an accident, her car was totaled. The insurance company said, well, Ms. Richardson, your 2004 Ford is worth $5,000. There you are. Thank you very much. And she gave the money to my brother, who went out and bought the exact same car.
Right.
Same color.
Right.
Great. That works. That works fine. You can't say, my mom actually had open heart surgery at University of Michigan Hospital yesterday. You can't say, oh, your heart? Well, here's $40,000. Have a nice day.
Right.
It doesn't work. And so initially the insurance companies never in the 1870s wanted nothing to do with the idea of health insurance for several reasons. But there's a promotion on WCPT, Tom. It's probably not your show that does it. They probably do it, where you're debating somebody who's about health insurance, and he says, Tom, insurance is one of the miracles of free enterprise. And you said, yeah, but it's killing my wife. And I would have said, to him, but health is not a matter of free enterprise.
Right. Health is not something that should be subject to market forces.
Exactly. The next thing is, now the Republicans are getting this too, and they're saying, oh, the free market should determine like cash-only surgeries and stuff like this. And Bob McEwen, a representative from Ohio, is out making this pitch. And what he's described the free market, and exactly what he's talking about is why it doesn't fit health either. And that is that in health, or for the free market, requires preferred variances in quality and corresponding costs, right?
Sure.
If I don't want an expensive one, I buy a cheap one. I don't need an expensive one.
Right.
Nobody's looking for a cheap doctor.
Yeah, and what you're describing is true of whether you're looking for a restaurant or whether you're looking to buy a car. You have this broad variety of choices from, really good to not so good, and really, and you're right. Everybody wants a good doctor.
Right. Nobody, or some half-assed way of treating whatever kind of illness. They say, nobody's looking for a corner cutter in treatment.
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing is, Tom, I have to point out, and everyone needs to. I finally heard someone say Amy Goodman was interviewing a woman yesterday on Democracy Now! Why the public option would have failed. And there's the reasons, and why progressives really threw a fit over Obama, didn't show up in 2010, and this is the reason. Because I just described the insurance public option would have just been another type of insurance, only it would have been in the worst spot. Not only that, the public option is associated with single payer, and what would have happened is, because insurance premiums are going up as a result of costs going up, this would have happened to the public option being another form of insurance. This would have had to require taxes being raised. Would have been a very sore political spot for most people, everybody. You got to keep raising taxes. And then the other thing this woman was pointing out was that the insurance companies would offload all the sickest people onto the public option, so it would die of adverse selection.
Yeah.
And that would also put a
You either have to do it all
payer.
or not at all.
I'm sorry, you got to go single payer or not. And that's why my friends who are in Canada, they say, you guys are nuts. How can you have all these different kinds of insurance? It doesn't work.
Yep.
You got to go in all in or not.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point, Paul. Paul, thank you. Very well said. Very, very well thought out. I appreciate it. Rob in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind?
Hey, I've got some ideas for education, but first I just wanted to recap what I've been hearing all day is the DNC, and I wish I could have called in earlier, we just need to be the party that's pro-quality of life for all. And the
Yes.
for all is key because that differentiates us from the conservative. And
Right.
under that pro-quality of life, falls the categories of pro-worker, pro-public education, pro-single payer, and pro-justice.
Right, and pro-clean environment.
Yes. Okay, and then on that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I think the Democrats are missing a big opportunity to be the ones that would modernize and fix the public educational system. And I think what we should do, first off, is go from 180 days or 36-week school year to a full 52 weeks or 260 days. So basically all the teachers and everyone's employed full-time, for the whole year. And you keep the credit hours the same. And this would allow students to either graduate early if they wanted to, take extra classes, or some students who are slower, to pick up their extra classes during the summer.
Right.
This would also ease working class families so they can, adjust their schedule a little.
Yeah, it essentially provides childcare. I mean, the whole summer break thing is vestigial. It's a leftover from the days when the majority of people in the United States lived on farms and the kids needed to go home in the summer and fall and harvest the crops.
Correct. And then, after we get that done, we got teachers on full time. We need to adjust the whole system and make sure that the teachers are the highest paid quality and revered in this country.
I agree.
Like they are in the other countries.
I agree.
The other thing we need to add is we need to add certified vocational options in our school system as well.
Yes.
And, that way they come out and you're ready to work right away. And then
as we had, by the way, at one point. I mean, when I went to junior high school and high school back in the 60s, that you could graduate from high school and have taken a couple of shop classes, which sounds like really simple stuff, but actually you'd learn how to use a lathe and a blanchard and some of the tools in a tool and die shop, and literally go right into an apprenticeship in a tool and die shop or a metal fabricating place or an auto factory or whatever. Bang, just like that, into a good job.
Right, and also make it mandatory to just know business basics of starting your own business.
Yes.
Not only do you have a vocational, but the laws and
yes, and teach people basic home economics. In other words, how to balance a checkbook, how to
absolutely,
and how to change a diaper, and how to maintain relationships. I mean, just basic stuff that should go along also with good sex education as well.
Right. So I think that the Democrats need to, like I said, we're going to miss a big opportunity. We're being crushed by public options right now. In the state of Arizona, you got these vouchers now. It's going to drain even more money out. And if we don't update our schools to make them the best, where people don't want to really go to the other schools, make our teachers the highest paid, so it just becomes the focal point of our country, and then we're all on the same page. And so I think the Democrats really got to be the people to push the modernization and the fixing of our public educational system.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I've often said, our teachers hold our future in their hands. Our police hold our present in terms of the quality of life and the fate of our individual lives and our nation. And both teachers and policemen should be held to very, very high standards and be very, very well paid. And we're doing that. We're doing that in neither case. And go to Northern Europe and talk to the teachers, talk to the cops. You'll find a very, very different culture. Rob, thank you. Well said. And thank you all for being with us today. My apologies to those of you still on hold, waiting to get in. We will be back tomorrow. And we'll continue rolling through Anything Goes summer here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. It requires you. It requires your friends. Let them know how you listen to the program. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.